of 25 members elected at the same time as the Mayor in order to hold him to account and scrutinise his policies. This is a Mayor's question time meeting of the Assembly, which means that all members are invited to attend and ask questions of the Mayor. May I remind members that in accordance with the current safety guidelines, face masks are encouraged to be worn in the meeting room, unless speaking or unless you are medically exempt. Members are also reminded that any electronic devices should not be placed in front of microphones, which must be turned on to speak, and please turn them off once you've finished speaking. Can I ask the Clerk, Rebecca Arnold, to confirm any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies received from Assembly members Bailey, Duval and Sheikh. And joining us remotely, we have Assembly members Bakari and Pigeon.
I begin with an update on the recent Assembly activity since the last full Assembly meeting. We have moved to our temporary offices in Union Street, and I'd just like to thank all those staff who were involved in that move. It's made it as seamless as possible, so thank you for that. The GLA Oversight Committee examined the Mayor's promotional spend and spoke to two new mayoral advisors. The Budget and Performance Committee examined the budgets of the Old Oak Park Royal Development Corporation and the London Legacy Development Corporation, the Met Police and the London Fire Brigade. The Economy Committee discussed the future of financial and professional services in London, and a second meeting was held exploring climate adaptation and climate risks in the capital by the Environment Committee. The Transport Committee looked at the Mayor's commitment to adopt Vision Zero for road danger in London, and our Police and Crime Committee held a question and answer with MOPAC and the Met on the Mayor's draft Police and Crime Plan for 2021 to 25. The Economy Committee published its report into London's nighttime economy, identifying concerns among those in the sector. And tomorrow's meeting of the Budget and Performance Committee will be our final meeting before Christmas, and may be examining the Transport for London budget. I think that last meeting might be a bit in the air at the moment, but yes. Can I ask the Assembly to note the interests set out at item 2? And do Assembly members have any disclosable pecuniary interests which relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting, or any other relevant interests, including any declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality, which are not reflected upon the authority's register of gifts and hospitality? Can I ask, therefore, to the Assembly to approve the minutes of the London Assembly Mayor's Question Time meeting held on the 18th of November 2021 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Can I ask the Assembly to formally receive the Mayor's report covering the period 5th of November to 2nd of December 2021. And the Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length, on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Mr. Mayor, good morning.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. The Omicron variant of COVID-19 is now spreading extremely rapidly in London and across the country. Nationally, there were over 78,000 COVID cases reported yesterday in total, the highest ever daily figure reported. In London, there have been over 19,000 new cases reported in the last 24 hours. Sadly, we're also now seeing an increase in the number of hospitalisations, up by 10% nationally week on week, and up by a third here in London. Vaccines remain our best defence against COVID, and we know that getting the booster jab will offer much greater protection against the Omicron variant. That's why we're using all the resources at our disposal in London to assist the national campaign to offer all adults a booster jab by the end of the month. The NHS in London is working in partnership with local authorities, as well as thousands of volunteers and the military, to help open up and staff new vaccination sites, to extend the opening hours of existing sites, to increase vaccine supply, and to add slots to the national booking system. And I want to thank all the NHS staff and volunteers again today for the incredible way they're helping to accelerate progress on the booster campaign. Over recent days, it's also been encouraging to see the big increase in number of Londoners coming forward to get their booster jab. And I urge all Londoners again today to come forward to get their vaccine or booster jab as soon as possible. It will not only offer vital protection against COVID, but slow the spread of the virus, help to save lives and protect the NHS. I'm also increasingly concerned by our business community, particularly in hospitality and culture, who are being seriously adversely affected by a combination of government advice and the impact of the new variant. It's crucial that the government provides a financial package to support these businesses. If they don't, many of these businesses could go bust, with tens of thousands of jobs being lost. Chair, I also want to briefly update the Assembly and others on the financial crisis facing Transport for London caused by the pandemic. As things stand this morning, the government is still refusing to properly fund TfL, and ministers are effectively holding London to ransom, threatening to withhold emergency funding unless we raise significant additional revenue for TfL in London over and above increases already agreed early this year and last year. The fairest way for any additional increase would be for the government to let us keep the £500 million that Londoners pay every year in vehicle excise duty, which is currently used almost entirely to maintain roads outside London. But this proposal has so far been rejected. Instead, ministers are insisting on measures to raise even more revenues from London. This will unfairly punish Londoners. This means that in order to help save TfL from collapse and to safeguard London's economy, there is no alternative but for us to increase council tax by around £20 a year over the next 3 years. There are also some changes and modifications to fare structures and ticketing that will have to be made in order to meet the government's additional demands. But I want to be clear that even with the additional funds we're being forced to raise in London, TfL will still have to make significant cuts to transport services, planning on the basis of managed decline. Only a proper long-term funding deal with the government, including additional capital funding, will avoid these damaging and significant cuts. So I call again on the government to stop playing politics with an issue of such great national importance. I'm proud London contributes almost £40 billion to the government to distribute to other parts of the country, and proud TfL supports more than 43,000 jobs around our country. I say to the government, start working with us in good faith so that we can agree a long-term funding deal that will protect London's transport network for the sake of the capital and the whole country. Chair, before I go to the two requests for an oral update and before we get into the heat of Mayor's question time, can I take the opportunity to wish you, all members of the Assembly, your families and staff a very Merry Christmas and a safe Christmas, and look forward to seeing you when we do in the new year. Chair, I've also been asked for two oral updates. The first from Senator Pigeon, who joins us in the safety of her home on a booster rollout. A lot of us, Chair, were caught on the hop by the Prime Minister's announcement on Sunday. But the good news is the NHS are making every possible effort to achieve this target, working in partnership with local authorities, as well as thousands of volunteers and the military, to help open up and staff new vaccination sites, extend the opening hours of existing sites, increase vaccine supply, and add slots to the national booking system. My team and I have been in daily contact with the NHS and partners, often more than one time a day since Sunday over the last week. Opening hours for vaccine centres are being extended, with several now open 7 days a week. More pop-up sites are coming online, with local areas looking at the most convenient sites for their communities, from trucks and buses in parks and shopping centres to sports stadiums and places of worship. There are now more than 400 sites across our city, more than there ever have been. The weeks ahead are going to require yet another extraordinary effort from the NHS staff, volunteers, partners and community groups who have been such a key part of its success. And I want to pay tribute to everyone involved for their phenomenal efforts, including Team London volunteers who have stepped up across our city. The vaccine rollout has been already an incredible success, with 15.4 million doses of the life-saving vaccines now delivered in London and 2.4 million boosters, a remarkable achievement. There are currently 80,000 boosters per day in London. As a global city, we've led the way in what has been the biggest ever rollout of the vaccine our capital and country has ever seen. Vaccines are the best defence against the virus, and the booster offers vital extra protection against this rapidly spreading variant. If you have not had your jabs, you're more likely to get COVID-19 or spread it to loved ones. The consequences to you are also going to be more severe. I'm urging all Londoners to please come forward to get your vaccine or booster. It's never too late, and it will save lives. Chair, I've also been asked for an additional oral update from Assemblymember Unmesh Desai about the Stephen Port case and the inquest that recently took place in relation to the murders for which he was responsible. My thoughts remain with the families of Anthony Walgate, Gabrielle Kovari, Daniel Whitworth and Jack Taylor. The evidence given to this inquest was deeply upsetting, and the quality of the investigation carried out by the Met Police Service at the time of the murders in 2014 has raised a number of concerns. The impact this has had on victims' families and friends, on top of the devastating trauma of the murder of their loved ones, is profoundly distressing and has damaged the confidence of the LGBTQ+ community in the police. I'm in regular contact with the Commissioner and the Metropolitan Police Service. I've been clear that although the Met Police Service has apologised for its failings and that changes have been made since these horrific murders were committed, I still want to understand what more needs to be done to ensure this never happens again. And this is why I've asked Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary to conduct an independent inspection into the standards of investigations carried out by the Met Police Service and to ensure there is a clear plan of action. It's vital that London's LGBTQ+ community has confidence in our police, and Baroness Louise Case's independent review into the culture and standards at the Met Police Service will address the issues of misogyny, sexism, racism and homophobia, and scrutinise police processes and standards of behaviour amongst officers and staff. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. For the easy debate, could I ask if Assembly Member Desai would like to ask his supplementary here?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, firstly, can I say that I welcome everything that you said so far, and especially calling in the Inspectorate to look into what went wrong. Can also say that the inquest jury's verdict is a vindication of the efforts of the families who lost loved ones, families of Anthony Walgate, Gabrielle Kovari, Daniel Whitworth, and Jack Taylor, and I pay tribute to the families. Mr. Mayor, this, of course, is a really awful incident in my constituency, which has understandably damaged the trust with the LGBTQ+ community in London. What conversations are you having, if any, or intend to have with the LGBTQ+ community in London to regain trust?
We began conversations some time ago, even before the evidence that came out during the inquest. It's really important that we recognise the ripples of distress felt by everyone from the LGBTQ+ community, not just the family and friends of the four men who were tragically murdered. There have been changes made in the police service since 2014. We are waiting for the additional investigation done by the IRPC, but in the meantime, I've asked with my Deputy Mayor, Her Majesty's Inspector, to come in so we can be reassured, and so the communities can be reassured that the police have changed since when these murders occurred in 2014. And we've got to recognise all of us have a responsibility to work together to earn back that trust and confidence that is, I'm afraid, being lost.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Mayor, my second question is relates to the call by Margaret Hodge and 17 other London members of Parliament who written to the Home Secretary asking for a public inquiry into whether institutional homophobia played a role in the police investigations, and also the letter from Councillor Darren Rodwell, leader of Buck and Dagenham Council, who supported the call by the MPs, but who also feels, and it says in his letter, that the role of the IOPC, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, should be looked at. In 2019, they investigated the conduct of 17 officers, and no sanctions were applied against any of those officers who were involved in this very flawed investigation. As Councillor Rodwell says in his letter, and I quote, "If such multiple failings in investigation does not warrant sanctions, then what does?" And also he goes on to say that how the police themselves should be the subject of any review. And he concludes by saying, "Is the IOPC fit for purpose?" That's a very strong call indeed. Mr. Mayor, what are your thoughts?
I think the IPC is under scrutiny, rightfully so. I think the way the police are policed is really important for all of us to have confidence in the police. The police, need to be properly policed. I remember back in the 90s with you, in fact, calling for the abolition of the Police Complaints Authority because the police were policing themselves. I'm afraid the bad news is that it appears the IOPC, which followed on from the IPCC, hasn't addressed many of the concerns people have. You mentioned the formidable Councillor Rodwell, but also the local members of Parliament, and indeed yourself, have been really concerned about some of the failings. The IPC has reopened its investigation as a result of the evidence that we heard from the inquest. Separately, Her Majesty's Inspectorate and separately Dame Louise Casey are also looking into this as well. But I think the points that you've made on behalf of the MPs, the Leader of the Council and the families, the friends and the communities are points well made, and I'm sure the IPC hear you loud and clear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Pigeon, did you want to come back on your question? You're fine. Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Russell, who has a question very similar to the oral update, if you'd like to come forward.
Thank you, Chair, and hello, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned 19,000 cases in the last 24 hours, which really shows the scale of the impacts of this very transmissible Omicron variant. Now, I realise you don't actually run the booster programme, but your strategic coordination group was very effective in the first waves of the pandemic in making sure that things worked in London across every borough. So wherever anyone lived in London, they were looked after. They got a similar experience. And I just wonder what role the Strategic Coordination Group is playing in coordinating this latest response so that whichever borough you live in, Londoners are able to book a booster, get a PCR test, get hold of lateral flow kits if they need them.
Well, firstly, Chair, can I thank the member for her comments. I'm meeting with the leaders later on today. They'll appreciate those comments because they're tired, they're fatigued, and that recognition is much appreciated. So we've been working all this week, as I said, but also previously, we've accelerated the work we're doing. And you'll see some of the fruits of that, Caroline, this weekend in relation to, you may have heard in yesterday's press conference, reference to Wembley Stadium, Stamford Bridge. We'll also have another stadium in London stepping up, offering their services. But one of the big things we're trying to do using our contacts is get people to take advantage of what's called the Evergreen Offer. There are still, roughly speaking, 1.3 million Londoners who've not even had one vaccine. And so we're going back again and again. And there's some good news, which is over the last week, we've had record numbers of people taking the vaccine for the first time. We've gone, as far as the country's concerned, in relation to those taking the first vaccine, we're doing incredibly well, but there's still many people we haven't yet reached. As far as the booster jab's concerned, the good news is we're giving, roughly speaking, 8,000 a day. We've given 2.4 million, but it still leaves 2.8 million Londoners who are eligible for a booster jab because their second vaccine was more than 3 months ago, and those are the ones we've got to reach, as well as those who've not even had one vaccine. And we're using all the contacts at our disposal, faith leaders, trade unionists, volunteers, sports stadium, shopping centres and so forth, and any help you can give, because obviously you've got reach in some parts of the community, others don't. Please, encourage people to have the booster jab and the vaccine.
No, absolutely, and getting as many Londoners to feel confident to take up their vaccine is incredibly important. Now, the boosters, though, aren't the whole picture, because once you've had your booster, I had mine last weekend, but it's not going to kick in for another couple of weeks in terms of protecting me. So just in terms of measures to prevent spread of the virus and to keep everyone safe. Obviously, you've got a role in public health messaging around mask wearing on the tube, on buses, and you've been doing a lot on that. But we know that coronavirus is airborne. We know we need to be in well-ventilated spaces, and we know we need to be very mindful of mixing with people indoors. So will you widen your public health messaging on TfL to include the importance of keeping the windows open on buses and trains where that's possible? And I know you've done some fixes on buses to make that work, but this is a question about the messaging.
Chair, I'm more than happy to look into the messaging to see if we can improve that. And those sorts of ideas are really welcome. I mean, just to remind colleagues, Senator Russell knows this, but it was because of the ideas we received last summer that the windows now permanently open, clear issues with temperature. But I think people prefer to be a bit cold and with good ventilation rather than alternative, including the windows in between tube cabins also open as well. But again, I'll see what else we need to do to amplify messaging.
Thank you very much. I've also been in touch with London Underground staff who are worried about their health. They're working on the front line. They're being exposed sometimes to verbal abuse and even spitting incidents, and they feel like they're between a rock and a hard place. Are you able? What are you able to do to protect those TfL workers who are on the front line? They're not enforcement officers. Is there anything extra you can do to just even use your voice to encourage Londoners to treat these frontline workers with respect?
Well, firstly, this gives me the opportunity to put on record our thoughts at this time of year to the 103 families of transport workers who've lost their lives since this pandemic begun. It is unacceptable for anybody to be at the receiving end of verbal abuse, let alone physical abuse. Too many of our transport staff are on the receiving end of verbal abuse and physical abuse. One of the reasons why we don't encourage, inverted commas, normal TfL staff to enforce face mask wearing is because they then receive verbal abuse. That's why only the enforcement officers do so. They've issued, I think, 800 fixed penalty notices, but I'm quite clear that there is no place in a civilised society for abuse to those doing their job.
Indeed. Now, my final question is about the safety of meetings like this. Do you agree that the government urgently needs to bring back legislation so that formal assembly meetings, formal council meetings across this city can be held virtually, legally, because this meeting has to happen in person without government legislation to make it possible to hold it virtually, so that particularly our staff and also members and you can stay safe while we're doing our work?
Can I raise this really important and profound point, which is I worry the Prime Minister is risking public safety and public health because he's worried about upsetting his backbenchers. We know, I'm afraid, to do so would require a vote in Parliament, and because the Prime Minister hasn't got the support of his party, he's scared to take it to Parliament, which means we're risking our personal safety by attending in person. It's a mockery of what Chris Whitty said yesterday, and a mockery of the public health advice.
I'm out of time, but thank you very much.
Assembly Member Dr. Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, I want to come in on the issue of how to best protect Londoners from the Omicron strain, which is the dominant virus in London now. Increasing vaccination rates, increasing the uptake of boosters, and adhering to the public health messages are vital to stop the spread of the Omicron variant. Infection rates, as you said, in this country have it 78,000 cases per day, and 19,000 of them are in London. And hospital admissions will surely follow, just like night follows day. The proportion of population without a single jab is 3 times high in London as compared to the rest of the country. The 14 areas with the country's lowest vaccination rates are all London boroughs. And in Westminster, 4 out of 10 people haven't had a single jab. It's said that trust comes a step at a time, but leaves on horseback. Would you agree, Mr. Mayor, that we are hampered in London by our efforts to increase the vaccination and booster rates by 2 things: the misinformation by the anti-vaxxers and the erosion of the public trust in the government, who have been flouting the very rules they set up themselves?
Chair, can I just indulge the Assembly by using the opportunity to thank Dr. Sahota, members of his family who work in the NHS, but also those in his profession. He'll be working this Christmas while the rest of us get some time off. I'm really grateful for the work your family and others do in the NHS, but the NHS generally. But I think we've got big challenges in relation to being a global city, not just the reasons you've said, but also because we've got a younger population, they're more mobile, they're more diverse, less likely to be registered with a GP, less trusting of people in positions of power and influence because they're often immigrants or children of immigrants who may not have as much trust in them, as well as the reasons you have said. It's very difficult for people to try and ask others to follow the rules when they're breaking the rules themselves. When you see photographs of people who aspire to have the best jobs or have the best jobs with the most responsibility flagrantly breaking the rules, it's hardly a surprise when others don't follow the rules as well. That's why it's so important for us to lead by example when it comes to not just this, but other issues as well. I think we've got a big challenge on our hands because Omicron is a particularly nasty type of variant. You heard yesterday the experts saying this is the stage of the pandemic when they're the most concerned. And that's why we've really got to focus on the 1.3 million Londoners who've not even received 1 jab to try and explain to them why it makes a difference. A small number of them are listening to the anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theories, but a large number of them simply need to be properly explained the benefits by trusted message carriers. Clearly, some people are no longer trusted message carriers, and that's why, to follow the point from Caroline Russell, we in London are using respected message carriers to get that message across. That could be family and friends, it could be faith leaders, it could be others who are trusted by those who have still not received even 1 vaccine.
Mr. Mayor, of course, we know that the peak will be sometime in January, and we really need to do everything we can in terms of public health policy also. And I think the Labour Party showed real leadership in the House of Commons on voting on Tuesday for measures which the government wasn't able to carry because of the attitude of his backbenchers. In London, you give leadership to Londoners, and I wonder what your message will be to Londoners this Christmas so they can have a safe Christmas and that we can really stop the spread of Omicron virus hitting the peak, which we suspect will happen in January.
Look, I mean, for somebody like me who's often accused of being a tribal politician, I'm incredibly proud of what the Labour Party did this week, acting in the public interest and for public health rather than in narrow party political interest, and basically giving the votes the Prime Minister needed to get Plan B through. I think this Assembly is a tribute to our city. Cross-party, we work together. I think there's unanimity amongst this Assembly about the need for the booster jab. All of you have done an incredible amount of work over the last 18 months. Londoners are grateful for, because you've got reach in parts of our community others haven't. And that's why it's really important we continue to use the role we have to encourage our constituents, people who vote for us, people who support us, our family, friends, neighbours, to get the booster jab and or the vaccine if they've not had that, but also to follow the rules over the course of the next few days and weeks. Your point about January is really, really important. Hospital admissions normally lag 2 weeks after somebody gets the virus. And when we're talking about record numbers of people catching the virus, like you said, as night follows day, hospital numbers will go up. At the moment, the numbers in hospitals, those on ventilators, is less than this time last year, but the number of positive cases is far, far higher. And that's why it's so important we do what we can to alleviate the pressure on the NHS, as well as saving lives.
And finally, Mr. Mayor, of course, it'll be the NHS staff who will be ramping up the vaccination rates, who will be giving up their Christmases, who will be working on Christmas Day and Boxing Day. These are the very people who we clapped for on Thursday evenings last year. I wonder if you would go on the record to thank them for their hard work. And also, I will be working over the Christmas time delivering vaccination boosters. Would you join me in my constituency in one of the vaccination centres?
I'd love to, Chair. I'm going to another part of London this weekend, but I'm sure we can arrange to come to your community. But you raised an important point, which I forgot to mention, which is the volunteers. In addition to the amazing NHS staff who are just knackered, they're just knackered, and they're still, working over the course of the next few days and weeks during Christmas. The number of volunteers stepping forward has been just inspiring. And thank you. I know how tired we all are, but thank you for stepping up over the period to give the jab yourself. And I want to thank all the volunteers. And I'll be visiting vaccination centres, but using the bullet I have to encourage others to have the vaccine and the booster as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Could I ask the Mayor to move if possible, move the microphone a little closer? You're coming over as a little faint.
Okay?
I know you're not.
How's that, Chair?
Thank you. I think that's better. Assembly Member Devonish, please.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. You talked about the TfL bailout in your statement and you cried wolf as usual. There is a deal on the table. But my question to you is, why did you tell the Evening Standard 35 minutes ago that you're making changes to the congestion charge and not this Assembly?
Chair, maybe the member could tell me what the deal is from the government.
I didn't hear that.
The member said there's a deal on the table from the government. What is the deal on the table?
Mr. Scully's made it very clear there's a deal on the table.
What is the deal on the table?
We're not going to sit here and negotiate a deal. This is mayoral questions.
What?
Why have you told the London Evening Standard
You've got the nonsense of Devonish bellowing nonsense. What is the deal?
Mr. Mayor, why have you told the London Evening Standard on the congestion charge and not told this Assembly?
Chair, the member has asserted there is a deal on the table. My answer is, what is the deal on the table?
Sorry, this is mayoral question, Mr. Mayor.
And I've answered your question with a question. What is the deal on the table?
Wonderful. That's really helpful. So you're not going to answer the question as usual.
Well, I think you're being as helpful as the government when it comes to TfL's finances. It's quite clear, Chair, there is no deal on the table. We've put forward further proposals to raise additional revenues. We've been waiting since August to talk about this with the government. The member of the Assembly refers to Paul Scully, who is not a Transport Minister, has no locus, and is talking to me via the Evening Standard. My question to the member
talk to him via the
what
Evening
is the
Standard.
deal
That's the problem.
on the table? And the
So you're not going to answer the question. Would you answer the question about the congestion charge? Why have you announced the congestion charge in the London Evening Standard rather than to this Assembly?
The changes to the congestion charge have been announced today. And
in the Standard?
Well, they were announced today, as I'm required to do, to enable them to come in as soon as possible.
I'll leave it there, Chair. Typically, no answers to any questions. Merry Christmas, Mr. Mayor.
Well, Chair, I'm sure even you'd agree I should be able to respond to the assertion made by the member of the Assembly.
Well, that was an assertion rather than a question.
Oh, so it's assertion times, is it, rather than question times?
Well, apparently not, because we're moving on. So, Assembly Member Baker.
Well, the season of goodwill doesn't apply to the partial chair, I see.
Chair, can I just say that the time of all of that exchange is still being taken off Labour, and could we have all the time restored? Refresh it again. Every 2 minutes, refresh it.
Member Baker, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Mayor, for your updates around Omicron and TfL funding. I'd like to ask about the interaction of these two crucial things. As we know, Transport for London is uniquely dependent on fares income since the removal of the operating grant. Can you provide us with an update on tube and bus ridership since the rise of Omicron and how this might impact on TfL's income?
Yeah, well, thank you for your question. So, as it was before Omicron and working from home, we were seeing, roughly speaking, around 60% of tube users versus pre-pandemic levels, and around 75% of bus users versus pre-pandemic levels. And you'll appreciate that means we're spending far more than we're bringing in, but you'll appreciate that actually, unlike every other transport authority around the world, we rely about 3/4 of our revenues from fares. So when the fares plummet, it really impacts our ability to pay for the services we're required to provide. Unfortunately, since the working from home advice, we've seen a further 25% drop in tube numbers, and that means we've got even less money coming in, but we're still spending the same amount. And that's why the idea that the government is holding us to ransom and saying there is no emergency support because the deal runs out tomorrow unless we raise even more additional funds on top of the ones we've already agreed to raise and are raising last year and this year, demonstrates why we've got such an anti-London government. And I find it astonishing that any member of this Assembly who represents London would rather be sucking up to an anti-London government rather than standing up for Londoners. Is just beggars belief.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. They are worrying figures, although obviously we understand why people are being asked to work from home. Following up with that, obviously you've made it clear that there is no deal, and it seems that the discussions are minimal, and considering the situation that you've outlined with further fares income dropping, seems even more essential that discussions are going on and we're moving towards a deal. But just to be clear, has the rise of Omicron affected any urgency from the government in discussing a deal with you, or are we still facing serious prospect of managed decline for Transport for London?
There is no news from the government, and if Tony Devonish has any details of the deal, I'd be really happy to talk about it with him. He clearly is an emissary of Boris Johnson and the government here, so if you can tell us what the deal is, we'll be happy to negotiate with him, as Grant Shapps hasn't got the courtesy to meet with us. The bad news is that even with the additional revenues we'll be raising, and I've set out some of those in my opening statement, we're still working on the managed decline scenario. The managed decline scenario means almost a 10% cut in our tube services, almost 20% cut in our bus services. That means about 100 bus routes going, and the frequency of buses on another 200 routes being reduced, and it could mean us mothballing one of our tube lines. That's with the additional revenues that I've set out today that we've got to raise, because the government basically is holding us to ransom. Unless I do that, then basically this weekend the short-term deal runs out. And my message to the government is, rather than negotiating through Tony Devonish, talk to me, and so we can work out a deal to make sure that London can continue to contribute £40 billion towards the Treasury's coffers.
Thank you. Yes, I hope that mystery deal does appear at some point. I would like to just finally ask you about the proposed changes that you outlined at the beginning around fare structures that are effectively being forced on Londoners due to the government's unwillingness to support transport through this ongoing pandemic. What do you think the long-term impact might be of these forced above-inflation fare rises, restrictions of concessions on the return to public transport that eventually we will need to see?
Well, it's a false economy for a variety of reasons. The government says they want to get to zero carbon. The government says they believe in supporting the renewable sectors and electric vehicles and so forth. You're not giving us financial support to do that. But also, you will know in many parts of our city where there's a reliance on the buses. If we're having to cut bus services, cut some buses running, we can't be surprised if people then jump back in their car. But also, you'll know that often the poorest Londoners live in areas where they've got no car and they rely upon the bus. So it'll make the inequalities in our city greater and poverty as well. But also, if we are able to, if we're not contributing as much as we are now in future years because of cuts in TfL, how can the government give monies to other parts of the country as they want to do so and as we support? You don't get levelling up by dragging London down. Our ability to contribute to the national coffers is because we've got a TfL firing all cylinders and because London businesses flourish and thrive when there's a decent public transport system. The government really is cutting its nose to spite its face.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We now move to the questions on the priority order paper. Each group is allocated an amount of time to ask their questions that is proportionate to their
Chair, if I
size.
may, sorry, just interrupt. The Labour group timer is still ticking.
Sorry, for those who are watching, there's some technical issues with the timer. But as I was going back, we should allocate an amount of time to ask questions that is proportional to each group's size. The first question is in the name of Assembly Member Berry, and it's about the true cost of the Silvertown Tunnel. Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you, Chair. The costs of cancelling the Silvertown Tunnel are not fixed and are commercially sensitive, as they would have to be negotiated with Riverlinks should a termination be discussed or decided by the courts by way of compensation payable for breach of contract. In line with standard commercial practice, the Silvertown Tunnel project agreement provides for compensation of costs incurred and loss of expected profits, less payments received. In general terms, as this is a design, build, finance and maintain agreement, there would be costs associated with cancellation of the loans put in place by the winning consortium to finance the construction in line with normal practice for this sort of agreement. I know there's been a lot of misinformation on this from some members of the Assembly, so it's important to be clear. Cancellation would not save TfL any money or allow it to reallocate any funds. Cancelling would in fact incur significant costs to TfL, placing additional pressure on TfL's finances at what is already an extremely difficult time. The Silvertown Tunnel will bring widespread benefits to London, particularly to East London, and is much cheaper than cancellation. The Blackwall Tunnel, which is the only current alternative, was not designed to cope with today's traffic levels as a Victorian tunnel built for horses and carriages. It has to be closed on average around 700 times a year, and if it closes even for 6 minutes, the queue quickly extends to 3 miles. By finally addressing this long-standing issue, the new tunnel will massively reduce congestion in the area, which has a negative impact on air quality and productivity, as well as supporting economic growth in East London. The project will enable a step change in cross-river bus connectivity in that part of the city, resulting in the proportion of trips by public transport on the Blackwall-Silvertown corridor increasing from 10% today to 30% once the new tunnel is in operation, a threefold increase in public transport with a Silvertown tunnel. In fact, one of the most unreliable buses in London is the single-decker 108, which has to rely on the Blackwall Tunnel to get from one side of the river to the other. As all of this will improve air quality in areas that currently experience some of the worst air quality in London, owing to frequent, lengthy queuing at the Blackwall Tunnel. Baseline air quality monitoring commenced in December 2020, and TfL is developing a comprehensive monitoring programme to ensure the effects of the Silvertown Tunnel scheme are fully understood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Now, the good news is I don't want to argue with you today about the case for cancellation of the Silvertown Tunnel. I want to really focus on the question of the cost of cancellation today. And the reason I'm asking, it's a democratic one. The Assembly has the power to amend your budget early in 2022. And in previous years, in fact, back to 2011, because the scheme was originally put forward by Mayor Boris Johnson, the Green Group on the Assembly has put forward amendments that do cancel the Silvertown Tunnel. We've made savings by doing that before, removing Transport for London's development costs each time. Now, since you've signed the contract to build it, we've not been able to do this because, as you point out, the cost of cancellation is now what we have to put into the new budget, and that cost is being kept secret. Now, I do believe you have a duty to be transparent with the Assembly about this so that we can consider it in the budget process, including how we might find funding for it and other financial considerations, such as the amount of money we'd save Londoners on tolling fees. So again, can I ask you, can we have a usable estimate from you that we can use in our work on the budget? Will you write to me with that estimate?
I don't need to. You just go to the Oversight Committee. This information has been shared with the Oversight Committee. It's been reviewed by TfL's auditors, Ernst and Young.
Mr. Mayor, with respect, I have the auditor's report here, and this is the pages that outline the cost of cancellation. They're entirely redacted.
TfL have shared full details that they're able to do so. Some aspects of this are public and the contract is available on the website. This explains the general concept of how such costs would be calculated. And as I've said, the costs aren't fixed. And as I've explained, TfL's estimates are commercially sensitive and cannot be made public. And if you think about it logically, you must be able to appreciate why. The idea that you would make public the consequences of a breach of contract, which is what's been suggested by the amendment from the Greens, is clearly nonsensical. Who would do that?
I mean, you described before how it needs to be negotiated, and I've actually put together a number. Obviously, you know, we've agreed to give in tolling fees to the Riverlinks contractor, around £2.5 billion. And we know that the construction costs are about £1 billion. We're also taking on about £200 million worth of costs that are in our own budgets as well for additional construction. You can assume that the remaining 1.5 billion, that's a mixture of things like financing costs for the contractors, but also profits. And you can come up with an estimate of, like, even if we gave them most of the profits back as part of the negotiations, you might come up with a figure, something like £350 million. If I put that number to you, would you agree that we could use that in a budget estimate?
Chair, I've got to say this in a way that doesn't appear patronising, but the naivety of the chair of TfL saying publicly a figure that TfL would be liable to in a claim for breach of contract.
I'm asking for an estimate today, Mr. Mayor, not a figure.
Well, I'm not giving you an estimate because the reasons that I've got a fiduciary duty, but I'd hope that as a member of the Assembly, you would understand the consequences of making public what the liabilities potentially could be for either a breach of contract and also the idea of negotiated in public through Mayor's question time what could be liable to a private company, I think just demonstrates why, with respect, Londoners were right to reject you twice when you stood to be Mayor.
I have no further questions, but it's very disappointing that we're being denied the opportunity to do this democratic thing that we're entitled to do every year. Thank you.
Again, Chair, no question, but as you're being so impartial, I suppose I'll get a chance to respond.
Assembly Member Prince.
Mr. Mayor, obviously I completely agree with your position, and I think you've made the point of the weakness of negotiating in public. Would you agree?
What would happen if this contract was cancelled? Was it to be claimed in courts? And the court would decide with a judge what a breach of contract claim would be. And so what you don't do in litigation is make public in litigation what your assessment of damages are. Because often in litigation, a judge is deciding based upon the documents and contracts.
I agree totally, Mr. Mayor. Just saying this, obviously that is the weakness of negotiating in public, isn't it?
I'm talking about a litigation that would flow from a cancellation of the Silvertown tunnel, because there's two ways where you'd cancel the Silvertown tunnel. One is you'd negotiate.
Mayor, would you do me a favour, because it's out my time? Well, if that's fine, I'll take the answer, yeah? That's fine, thank you.
The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Desai, and it concerns winter pressures.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. In the next 3 months, Londoners face the usual winter risks of poor weather, the need to heat their homes, and the circulation of winter illnesses like flu. These risks are now combined with the effects of COVID on family and social life, on the economy, and above all, on the National Health Service. The combined impacts of Brexit and COVID have also led to specific measures on the economy, and food and energy prices have increased. HGV driver shortages, disruption to fuel supplies, and reports of shortages in supermarkets show that the systems that support normal life have become more fragile. The emergence of the Omicron variant and the new Plan B measures only increase this fragility. The impacts, as so often, fall first and most dramatically on the most vulnerable in our society. In the past 2 months, a range of economic and policy developments have converged to substantially increase the risk of greater numbers of Londoners experiencing financial hardship this winter. General inflation, the removal of the universal credit uplift, the end of the furlough scheme, and increasing energy prices are putting many Londoners under serious financial pressure. Whilst the government did announce some measures in the autumn budget designed to help low-income households meet the cost of living over the winter and beyond, it is simply not enough. These measures fail to provide support to some of the most vulnerable groups and are not enough to make up for the impacts of the government's other decisions. My Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience, Dr. Fiona Twycross, has convened industry leaders to examine and understand the compound effects of additional risk this winter, covering HGV driver shortages, fuel price increases, severe weather impacts, the strain on the NHS, and other issues that may arise. And the London Resilience Partnership is meeting regularly to keep abreast of any emerging or existing issues.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, so the new Omicron wave and COVID-19 is once again the biggest pressure facing Londoners this winter, and we are seeing impact on every part of our lives in the economy, transport, health, police, fire services, and housing. We already talked about transport, but my question to you is this: how is the GLA dealing with these challenges? You mentioned the role of Dr. Fiona Twycross, but how is the GLF, the family as a whole, dealing with these various challenges?
Yeah, good question. Structures matter because it means we can keep abreast of what's going on. So underneath the London Resilience Forum, there is a London Systems Pressures Oversight Group, which looks at the London Ambulance Service, Met Police Service, Fire Service, different parts of the NHS, TfL, rough sleepers. A lot of these are outside our control, but we need to know what's happening. And the big unknown is people who've got to take time off because they've got the Omicron. Dr. Sahota mentioned NHS pressures on the staff, but imagine if some of those have to go off because they have Omicron, and it affects the ability not just of the NHS, think of the fire service, their ability to help the ambulance service and so forth and so forth. That's why we're keeping an eye on all of this to make sure where we can, that shared information leads to better decision making, and then we share this with the government as well.
So turning to the role of the government, Mr. Mayor, how are you working with the government to address these various challenges over the next 3 months? And do you believe that enough is being done to tackle the issues faced with regards to Omicron this winter? I think earlier you said simply not enough is being done.
The announcement on Sunday from the Prime Minister did catch us on the hop, and it caught a number of all the partners in London and the NHS on the hop as well. We need to share information better. Had we known in advance in relation to the booster announcement, we could have made sure things were in place. We're playing catch up, and we've caught up, and we're ramping up the booster jazz. But information sharing is really important, and we're currently doing so because, as has been said by Dr. Sahota, the expectation is in January we could see big increases in the NHS in terms of inpatient, A&Es with big pressure already. Also got big pressures on non-COVID urgent care as well. Put aside London Ambulance Service, put aside GP shortages. So we're trying to do what we can to ameliorate the consequences of all those things conflating at the same time.
And finally, Mr. Mayor, the businesses and the trade unions have called for a reintroduction of emergency business support and the furlough scheme and reforms/increases to sick pay in the wake of Plan B measures being implemented. You presumably support this call.
Look, I mean, I mentioned that TfL, we've seen a 26% cut in people using our tubes. We're seeing massive cancellations in hospitality, in culture, theatres, bars, restaurants, live music, hotels. Unless there's financial support from the government, that includes grants, that includes 100% business rates relief, that includes a furlough scheme reintroduction, extension of the VAT relief from March. You're going to see businesses going bust and Londoners losing their jobs. That can't be good for anybody.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Forgot my own instructions.
Thank you,
Assembly
Chairman.
Member Hall. Sorry.
One of the biggest challenges for you, Mr. Mayor, and some of us Londoners over the next 3 months is the GLA's move to the new City Hall, which, of course, you said was a decision made based on assumed savings. So please, can you today confirm on which date we will move and that there will be a £61 million worth of saving over 5 years, which you've said before?
So, Chair, it was at the Assembly's request that today's MQT is taking place in Union Street rather than the new City Hall.
Which is a building site, yes. Carry on.
Is it my turn, Chair, or are you allowing your leader to chair this meeting?
Carry
You'd
on.
like to carry on, please, Mr.
Okay. It was at the Assembly's request that today's MQT is taking place in Union Street rather than the new City Hall. Accordingly, the new City Hall will be phased in from Tuesday, 4th of January, and the GLA will be operating fully from there by Monday, the 17th of January. In relation to the savings made, the GLA Group is on course to make a saving of at least £61 million over the next 5 years as a result of the relocation of City Hall as predicted. The core GLA will make savings of £47 million over 5 years, also as predicted. We've moved out of our former City Hall on time, in line with our contractual obligations, and will start saving money from as early as Christmas Eve. These savings will be used to help protect vital frontline services, including in policing, the London Fire Brigade, and our transport network. They will also enable us to invest further in London's economic recovery from the pandemic. It's worth also pointing out, Chair, that the new City Hall is a flagship sustainable building with BREEAM Outstanding and LEED Platinum certification, which are the highest available standards of sustainable construction. The refurbishment and fit-out to accommodate our arrival is on track to achieve its own BREEAM Outstanding certification. The building has arrays of solar PV and solar thermal supply, renewable energy and hot water, and these have been upgraded to ensure continued excellent sustainability performance from our new City Hall.
Thank you. Can you commit to sending me a complete breakdown of how you've worked out that figure? Because I don't recognise it. And the reason I am asking whether we're going to be in, because since the 25th of October, I have been asking our Chief Officer for a construction timetable or a building schedule, which none of us have been able to see whether it is on track. So can you commit to sending me a breakdown of how you worked those savings out?
Once we moved into the new City Hall and final payments have been made to contractors, we will publish the one-off costs of the move against budget and update on the overall position. Another Chief Officer has been invited to the March meeting of the Oversight Committee to discuss the move in detail. This will be a good time to review not only costs, but the challenge of this project and the achievements of the relocation team in overcoming them.
Right, we'll see. Thank you, Chairman.
Assembly Member Best, please.
Thanks, Chair. Mr Mayor, one of the biggest winter challenges Londoners will face over the next 3 months is the uncertainty around the full reopening of the night tube, which is something we've agreed on, and the need to address this quickly. Would you be able to tell me how many staff have been recruited and trained so far in the bid to reopen the Northern Jubilee and Piccadilly lines?
Chair, I've not got those numbers to hand, but I'm more than happy to get TfL to write to the member to give her that information. I should say that I think there'll be some delay now caused by a combination of Omicron and the restrictions that flow from that. So the way operators are trained is in a cabin. It clearly won't be possible for them to do so as had been planned because of the Omicron variant and additional staff sicknesses, but I'm sure TfL can send the member information that she seeks.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And if I could get that information, because we've still been waiting for the timetable as promised by you for over a month now. So well, if I could get that...
Chair, that's not quite right, and it's really important to clarify misinformation. I've been quite clear that we would open 2 of the lines as we did.
No, the timetable, Mr Mayor, maybe you misunderstood me. You promised the timetable of reopening, not the reopening.
I think TfL has said they'll be publishing in due course the timetable. I'll ask them to let the member know when that will be. My understanding is the timetable for resumption of the remaining lines will hopefully be available in the new year, but what I'll do is ask them to let the member know when it will so she can make plans accordingly.
Thank you. And just from what you've said, you may not have this information but I would appreciate the confirmation that you'll send this to me. Obviously, I understand that training was suspended because obviously, that, like you said, the 2 people in one cabin. So could you send me details of when that restriction was lifted, so when training was able to recommence, and perhaps, if, as you've just said, it's been put on hold again, could you also send me that information or get TfL to send me that?
Yeah, Chair, more than happy to. Those are very reasonable questions.
Thank you. And moving on, Mr Mayor, obviously there's further strike action planned again for this Friday and Saturday, this Saturday being particularly damaging to businesses given that's due to be, or predicted to be, the biggest shopping day of the year for London businesses. On the 26th of November, you tweeted that this unnecessary strike action by the RMT is causing widespread disruption for millions of Londoners and will also hit London's retail culture and hospitality at the worst possible time. Do you stand by that tweet in relation to the strikes happening this weekend?
Yeah, I've been out about this week speaking to retail, hospitality and culture. They're decimated because of the Omicron variant and working from home. I'm desperately hoping that people are able to still shop safely, and you can shop safely wearing a face mask, making sure you're boosted, washing your hands regularly and thoroughly. And I'd encourage RMT to get around the table with TfL, use the opportunities that ACAS provides to resolve this. I think strikes ultimately are a sign of failure. That's why we need to try and resolve this amicably. The other trade unions have resolved this amicably some time ago, and I'd encourage RMT and TfL to talk.
Thanks. you clearly are doing all you can. TfL are clearly doing all they can. But still, we have this unnecessary strike this weekend. So do you now recognise the need for stronger legislation to protect tube passengers and London?
What do you mean?
To protect them from strikes like this. You recognise that this strike is unnecessary. You're clearly doing all you can to solve it, but you can't, because there's not the legislation in order to stop.
What additional measures do you mean?
In order to stop the strikes,
What additional measures do you...
strikes like this, there's
Right.
nothing to protect London from these strikes, which have been unnecessary over the last month and will be unnecessary this weekend. Would you agree that you need further powers in order to help you address that?
My question is, which further powers are you suggesting that I should be asking for?
There are a number of ways in which you could have stronger powers over the unions in order to stop them striking for this long or at this amount of times. And I'm asking you if you would agree to having any of them.
I'm unclear which powers you're suggesting I have.
So you don't... Okay, so this is an easier question for you then, perhaps. Are there any powers that you would like to stop this?
Look, if the suggestion is that strikes should be banned, I'm against that.
No, that's not the suggestion.
Right, well, what
Are
is
there
the
any
suggestion?
additional powers you think you should have, or do you think you should just continue in a situation where the strikes you believe are unnecessary, you believe there's nothing you can do, and we should just accept that and continue? Are there any other further powers you would like? I want this solved. I would hope you want this solved. What I'm asking you as Mayor of London, is there any additional powers that you think you could have that would help you stop this?
There are no additional powers to curtail strike action that I think I currently need. What I need is for the RMT and TfL to get on the table to resolve this amicably. But if you're asserting other things that could be put forward, I'm more than happy to listen to what your assertions are.
And I'm asking you if you have any ideas, but clearly not. But I appreciate perhaps the sentiment. And you, as you've agreed, you said in February 2016, and Londoners will well remember, there will be no strikes. So do you think perhaps it is time to look at how we deal with this and if something else is needed? Because like you say, if this is unnecessary and you're doing all you can, what's next?
Well, let's see what I actually said rather than what's been asserted that I said. I said there'd be fewer strikes under me than under the previous guy. And since I've been mayor in May 2016, there have been 70% fewer strikes than when Boris Johnson was the mayor. At the same time, as there have been fewer strikes, we've made massive changes to transport for London. So reducing strikes, at the same time reducing TfL permanent staff by more than 4,000, that's a 16% reduction. We've taken out more than 60% of non-permanent labour. At the same time, reduced operating costs year on year, saving TfL more than £1 billion. So it's possible to make changes whilst reducing strike action. We've also, by the way, done something that the previous mayor never could do, despite making promises to do so. We've brought in the night tube and the night overground. Shows a difference talking makes rather than legislation banning strikes as you want to do.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank the mayor with the worst strike record rate for London for his answers today.
Chair, I'm assuming again, as an impartial chair, you're going to suggest that's a speech rather than a question for me to answer.
It's an assertion, and if you listen, all your Labour members will make assertions after their questions. Just because you like those assertions, they're still the same.
I'm assuming this is another speech rather than a question.
Or what we could do is get another questioner. Assembly Member Hirani.
Thank you, Chair. I think back to winter pressures, although the nighttime tube is important, especially if you're trying to get home from raucous parties. And also Londoners also deserve to see better discussions from us rather than where our tables and chairs are situated. So further to my colleague's original question on winter pressures, we know that hospitals, general practice, community services and social care in London are at a breaking point at the beginning of what is a very difficult winter. But from your conversations with NHS officials in London, are you confident that the government are taking this situation seriously and putting in the resources to tackle the challenges we face in health and social care?
So the reason why I pause before answering is I'm not sure if people really understand how stretched and strained health and social care in London is. I mean, despite the heroic efforts of those that work in health and social care, it's a creaking system that's been made a lot worse by 11 years of austerity. I think even now, if you threw money at it, you couldn't this winter alleviate some of the problems there are, but it might help in relation to morale. It might help in relation to people being able to, pay their bills and so forth. You'll be aware from your experience as a councillor in Brent, many of those care workers are on a minimum wage. right? They don't get paid between going from one home to another home often. And so, yeah, there are things the government can do, making sure they get a living wage and some, so they can not worry about the stresses and strains that, not getting a decent wage brings. We could try and get additional staff in, not made easier by the hard Brexit we've got. We've got a labour shortage as well as a skills shortage. Massively investing, of course, in skills won't help this winter. But rather than the Home Secretary announcing, as she did this week, those who have settled here having to re-register or face deportation, making them feel welcome. And I could go on. But I've got to be honest with you, it's going to be a tough winter, not just for health and social care and those that work in it, but for those people that use health and social care.
Thank you, Chairs and Mr. Mayor. And I'm mindful of time, so I'd be grateful if you can provide the next answer to me in written form. It's just asking for an update on when you'll be announcing your health skills hub as part of your academies programme to attract the next generation of talent into London's NHS and social care workforce.
Yeah, Chair, I'm more than happy to write to the member with the answer to that question.
Thank you. Assembly Member Ahmad.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Mayor. An additional challenge and pressure that many Londoners will face this winter is hunger. Now, I know you've agreed with me in the past that the image of hungry children on our streets is unacceptable and particularly poignant over Christmas, as you know. With the increase in the cost of living this winter, is the government's holiday activities and food programme, which provides free school meals for children for only one of the 2 weeks of the school holiday, enough to stop children in London going hungry this Christmas? And what conversations are you having with London boroughs on where the gaps are in this Christmas holiday?
No, it's not enough. So we've been lobbying the government. You'll be aware that we want funding for all 13 weeks where children aren't in school, rather than just the 6 weeks that has been talked about. But also you'll be aware, for those children whose parents have got no recourse to public funds, they're currently in a perilous position. And bear in mind, not only have these families who receive free school meals received a cut in universal credit, but they face increased energy bills. The ban on evictions has now gone, so they're worried about paying their rent. And so we are really worried about children in particular, families of course, going hungry this winter. We're doing what we can from City Hall in relation to reducing energy bills, in relation to the work we're doing with Kitchen Social. But this Christmas is going to be tough for many families in our city. We've got to recognise that. We've got some of the boroughs, some of the wards that are the poorest in the country in our city, contrary to what some in Parliament and some of our friends up north believe. The streets of London aren't paved with gold.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And you've called for additional support for businesses who have seen a significant drop in take-ins. We know that during the last wave, many businesses had to close or staff had to go into work sick. With the cut to universal credit uplift and the insufficient sick pay, are you concerned that we'll see a greater number of children going hungry this Christmas?
Well, what you're going to see is those who work in jobs where if you don't turn up at work, you don't get paid, they'll be risking their own health, their family's health and our city's health by going to work because they need money to put food on the table and pay for a roof over their head. But also some of the places that employ Londoners, think about the fact that 1 in 6 people work in hospitality and culture, could go bust this winter or be offering shorter hours because they can't afford to open at lunchtime and so forth. And so I'm really worried. I was speaking to business leaders, business owners and managers over the last couple of days. Their bookings have plummeted, cancellations have gone up through the roof, and this is the golden quarter. Some businesses make up about a quarter of their take-ins in this quarter of the entire year. And so unless the government steps in with a financial package, you're going to see businesses going bust, people losing their jobs, and more hunger about the families that you care so passionately about, as indeed do I.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to briefly come in after comments around recruiting and training staff that we heard earlier on, because as we know, recruiting and training staff of the transport system costs money, and that is what we don't have at the moment. I shouldn't be surprised to hear on one hand the Conservative Assembly members making demands of you that cost money. On the other hand, the National Conservatives seem to be deliberately withholding a deal that apparently some in this room are aware of. But what I'd actually like to ask, because I really think people in the room need to understand it, is what is the real impact of trying to operate and plan a complex transport system when you literally don't know what money you have in 2 days' time?
I mean, maybe you should speak to the Chief Financial Officer of TfL. He's working his socks off with a great team. They're pulling their hair out in relation to what they can do. And by the way, what doesn't help is when we reopen the night tube, as Londoners want us to do so, and the nighttime economy want us to do so, and government ministers criticise us for reopening the night tube because it costs money to do so when I'm making the savings. And so the Treasury criticise us for not making further savings by not reopening the night tube. And you've got members of this Assembly criticising us for not opening all 5 lines. We're damned if we do, and we're damned if we don't. You'll be aware, because of your campaigning to restore staff on the public transport network, which I did when I was elected mayor in 2016. We've now got about 500 job losses in that area. As a consequence of some of the decisions being made from central government. You'll also be aware, as somebody who understands transport in our city, that we are not signing new bus contracts, right? Because we've not been signing, we've already stopped signing new bus contracts. Some of those bus companies may well be having job losses as well, and will affect their ability to contract in other parts of the country. And so, you know, the government may think they're being clever or being spiteful and anti-London, but this will impact the entire country, and that's why it's nonsensical to me.
Thank you. We now move on to the next question in the name of the next question has been withdrawn. The one after that is in the name of Assembly Member Bakari, and it concerns tackling increased freight on London's road.
Sorry, Chair, can I be clear? Question 4933, confidence in the police, from Sean Bailey, has been withdrawn.
That's withdrawn. So if we can go on to Assembly Member Bakari, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. Apologies, I'm looking at the freight industry is vital to London's economy, and we are all grateful for operators' hard work and professionalism, providing a lifeline to many during the darkest days of the pandemic. The industry in London is now safer and cleaner than ever before. Our world-leading direct vision standard has revolutionised HGV safety by requiring advanced cab design or other technology to improve visibility, and the expanded ultra-low emission zone and the tightened low emission zone have reduced harmful emissions. Last Friday, I published a report following the first month of the expanded ULEZ. I was pleased to see that compliance was high in the weeks before the launch and has grown in the first month, with the largest growth seen in vans, where compliance increased by a further 7%. This continues a long-term trend of van compliance increasing more rapidly than other types of vehicles from a low baseline. Overall, TfL has seen a decline in goods vehicles in the capital since the start of the pandemic. This appears to have been owing to reductions in heavy goods vehicles and vehicles servicing construction sites. However, there has been an increase in vans associated with an increase in internet shopping, which now makes up 30% of total retail compared to 20% before the pandemic. TfL is working with businesses to ensure we recover from the pandemic in a sustainable way, and we're now at a critical juncture at which to influence new habits as they are being established. It's a great opportunity to work with retailers, carriers and intermediaries to put in place the foundations for a sustainable future in which the sector contributes far less to congestion and pollution whilst continuing to support economic growth. One way TfL is doing this is by working to promote cycle freight, a zero-carbon alternative to traditional freight. TfL is currently developing a cargo bike strategy, working with business improvement districts, boroughs and industry. In 2018, my transport strategy set out the aim of reducing freight rates in central London in the morning peak by 10% by 2026. In 2019, TfL and I published a detailed programme of measures to help the industry become more efficient and to meet the aim in our Freight and Servicing Action Plan. These range from encouraging rail and water freight and promoting mixed land use to reducing unnecessary trips to supporting sustainable e-commerce and zero-emission last-mile deliveries.
Thank you so much for your answer, Mr. Mayor, and mentioning the work that you've been doing with TfL with businesses and cargo bikes, because that's kind of the area that I'm going to be talking about a little bit more. Countries around the world are already leading the way on switching to low and zero emission vehicles for freight transport. The DPD group in Zagreb, the capital of Croatia, is using electric cargo bikes for more parcel deliveries. And there are plenty of other European cities that have put in place dedicated spaces for larger cycles, including cargo bikes. As Mayor of London, you could do more to encourage businesses to move to more environmentally friendly modes of freight delivery and future-proof our infrastructure to account for the changes in relation to deliveries across London. Building on the work of Better Bankside, will you commit to working with business improvement districts to pilot a cargo bike hub to support local and last mile deliveries?
Well, thank you for your question, for your interest in this, and thank you for raising this at people's question time as well. I think it was really receptive in the room, what you were talking about, which is really good. No, completely agree with you about the interest of pushing this further. There are some really good examples that I'd encourage you to visit, in particular Hackney are doing some really exciting work in relation to cargo bikes. Lambeth and Waltham Forest, really good examples. And you're spot on, I referred to this in my original answer to your question, about the role of business improvement districts. Businesses need to understand the importance of this area and working closely with them. And you'll be pleased to know where we hope to have a strategy published next year from TfL, subject, of course, to us getting financial support from the government. If we don't get the financial support from the government we need, that will impact our ability to increase rapidly the further rollout of the cargo bikes that you've been talking about, but also that last mile delivery. How can that last mile not be in a polluting van, but be in on a bike or another forms of zero carbon transmission?
And thank you for mentioning the other boroughs, like Richmond Council as well, doing great work. What actions will you take to scale up the support of other boroughs to invest in the cargo bike hire scheme for small businesses? Just can you give me a bit more detail on that? Working with, for example, Pedal My Wheels would be a great way of supplying businesses and residents with more options, with maybe using a cargo bike for a monthly fee.
I've got to be honest, all those things look very difficult with the current finances and the challenges we're facing. A lot of our projects in this area will have to be cut if we're going to meet the targets the government has set. The government's asked us to make cuts of £720 million extra by 2024. So I've got to be honest with you. Yeah. These are things we want to do, and we're committed to them. And that's why the roles of the bids are so important, the boroughs and industry, because they can bring in additional money that TfL haven't got.
Well, considering the economic difficulties that you just mentioned, there was a van scrappage scheme for small business that ended in August, and many small businesses are excluded from that. So will you consider maybe using the revenue being raised by ULEZ charges to help small businesses purchase cargo bikes, helping them to stay in business?
I think if you're having this conversation with DFT after they've picked themselves up on the floor after laughing at that idea, they would say no, because the money from the scrappage scheme that we contributed was from TfL. It was £61 million from TfL. The government gave us zero money, although they're given Bath, Birmingham and Portsmouth money. There is no more money left in the scrappage scheme. And the ULEZ isn't raising the sorts of monies that the DFT expects it to raise for a good reason, because Londoners are doing the right thing. Right, 92% of vehicles are compliant and so aren't paying the ULEZ charge, and the small money that is being raised by ULEZ is paid for other public transport services.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you. The next question, actually we've had the next two questions withdrawn. So the next question is in the name of Assembly Member Best. Sorry for the confusion. That's been withdrawn all the way down to Assembly Member Fortune, whose question relates to the boundary charge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Can I check, is this 4926?
4926, that's correct.
Thank you, I'm grateful. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on TfL. At the height of the pandemic, passenger numbers collapsed by 95% as Londoners did the right thing and followed the government's advice to stay at home. This inevitably had a catastrophic impact on TfL's finances during the worst period. And during the worst period, TfL was losing £100 million per week. My clear aim remains to secure a sustainable long-term funding agreement with the government. This will support London's economic recovery and help achieve the government's own aims of a national infrastructure-led recovery, a decarbonised UK, and the levelling up of our economy. I call on the government to allow London to keep the £500 million raised annually in London from vehicle excise duty. It is not fair that the government spends this huge sum almost exclusively outside the capital, with TfL left to fund maintenance of major roads from its fares income. Unfortunately, the government has so far ruled this out. In the absence of agreement from the government on this clear and fair solution to some of TfL's funding challenges, I've had to ask the TfL to look at other options. I asked TfL to undertake a feasibility study into a potential Greater London boundary charge for non-residents, noting that an increasing number of cars are being driven into London each day from outside London. A scheme of this nature could raise in the region of £500 million per year, and all funds raised above the cost of implementing and operating the scheme would be invested in the transport network. The feasibility study will include an assessment of the effects of such a charge on traffic, environment, health, equality and the economy. I have not yet seen the feasibility study. Once I have, I'll be keen to discuss its findings with the government before it's published. If any proposals of this significance were to be developed further, they'll be subject to the usual decision-making process, including a full public consultation. Even if we were able to agree a way forward on revenue, the scale of the financial crisis TfL is facing means that we will still need government support on capital funding. This is money, for example, to replace aging trains on lines like the Bakerloo, which already has some of the oldest trains in use in the country, to upgrade signalling and to electrify our buses, a key part of tackling the climate emergency.
Thank you very much for your answer, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry, I'm sitting on a sort of fridge thing here, so I missed some of it. Sorry, did you say that there was a potential to raise about 500 million a year from that proposed boundary charge?
That's in the absence of the feasibility study. So the feasibility study may come back and say that's nonsense, but yeah.
Okay, thanks very much for that clarity. Look, this is a real issue for a lot of people who are living in the sort of outer regions of the capital. Just because the transport infrastructure system is different. You know, in Bexley and Bromley, where I represent, we don't have tube lines. There's a lot of dependence on buses. And of course, we have those porous borders where people travel outside of the borough to work, see friends, run businesses, run charities, etc. That's why it's such an important issue for us to get clarity on that. I think, so what you're saying from the answer is that suggestion or that possibility of that Greater London charge is still on the table in negotiations. Is that correct?
Yeah. So just so in summary, that's one of the options. So we sent an options paper to the government back in August. And the options paper, because the government asked us to set out what are the options for raising £500 million, that was one of the options there. We did a piece of, there's a piece of feasibility work taking place in regard to that particular option. That's not come back yet. That'll come back in January. We'll share that with the government. At the moment, it's still on the table.
Thanks for that. And, you know, I can only really stress that the concern that this is causing to some people in Bexley and Bromley. I had one of our local bid managers contact me recently, actually, to say that they were losing some businesses from empty units simply because they were worried about factoring in that cost. So the feasibility study, that's been worked on for a while. You wrote to me back in June to say it was nearly ready. I think you said it would be ready by the end of the year. So we're getting a bit tight for time on that. When do you estimate we'll be able to have a look at what that feasibility study has thrown up?
I'm told in the new year. You'll appreciate there's TfL have had so much bandwidth in relation to the work they've been doing and stuff, but you know, I've not seen it yet, put it that way.
So that feasibility study on whether or not that this would be something that could be used to negotiate, you've not seen it, and I don't think the Commissioner's seen it either. Is that?
No, he wouldn't. He'd have shared it. He'd have shared it with me.
He would have shared it with you. Yeah. Okay. Look, I mean, everybody's looking for the best deal that TfL can get, and for all Londoners. But I just want to stress again, it's my responsibility as the member for Bexley and Bromley that this would be really impactful on businesses, on families, and on charities. So if we could see that report as soon as possible, because it is a matter of genuine concern to lots of people in South East London, and I know elsewhere.
Chair, I mean, I fully understand the points raised in a straight manner by the member. I take those on board, and I promise to keep him updated once I know the position. But I understand the concerns he said.
Thank you, Assembly Member. Assembly Member, the next question is in the name of Assembly Member Hall, and it concerns disproportionate impacts of crime.
Thank you, Chair. I know that crime can disproportionately affect different communities and demographics. Last week, I published a report on the driving factors behind young people becoming involved in or being a victim of violence. We know, for example, that Black Londoners are disproportionately represented as victims and offenders for all categories of serious violence. 62% of homicide victims and 65% of offenders are Black Londoners. However, unlike some, I do not believe that it's skin colour that determines your chances of being a victim or an offender, but the disproportionate rates of poverty, unemployment and school exclusion affecting London's Black communities. Working with the VRU, England's First, City Hall is implementing a wide range of programmes to support young Londoners who are disproportionately affected by violence, from help with housing and poverty to education and workplace issues. The Young Londoners Fund has already provided positive opportunities to over 100,000 young people in our city, while Sport Unites is using the power of sport to improve lives, and our Workforce Integration Network programme is supporting young Black men into living wage employment in London. And last week I announced that next year, over the course of just 12 months, we'll be stepping up our work with a package of measures that will support nearly 100,000 more young Londoners. We also know that women are overwhelmingly affected by domestic abuse and sexual violence. We know that the majority of crimes against women are committed by men. And that's why my refreshed Violence Against Women and Girls strategy will take a public health approach focusing on the complex underlying causes of these offences, alongside tackling perpetrators and ensuring that victims have the support they need. We've invested a record £60.7 million to tackle violence against women and girls. £44 million of this money has been invested in specialist services for victims of sexual violence and domestic abuse, in supporting women affected by harmful practices like female genital mutilation, and in programmes to address the behaviour of perpetrators of abuse. We also know that religious communities are sometimes the victims of hate crime. I'm supporting grassroots organisations through the Shared Endeavour Fund to further deliver on our commitment to tackle racism, hatred, intolerance and extremism. In the last year, this programme has funded over 30 organisations, including several projects that specifically focus on countering anti-Semitism. The changing nature of crime makes it vital that we remain vigilant. That's why MOPAC monitors policing, crime and confidence data year-round, and why we always want to speak to Londoners and hear their experiences. This evidence-led approach is at the heart of all our work on policing and crime, and will continue to be so as we move into a new police and crime plan period.
Okay, well, I'd like to start by saying I don't like you coming out with comments like you do regarding the colour of people's skin. Totally unnecessary, an outrageous comment. So I'll go back to the last plenary meeting. Were you shocked at the figures that the Commissioner was giving you? Because you and I were quoting different figures, and she gave us the real figures. She was saying that victims of homicide under 25, 97% of those victims are young men or boys, and 72% are Black. She also said someone is 12.2 times more likely to be a victim if you're a young Black man than a young white man. Were you shocked by those terrible figures?
Chair, I'm unclear which comments of mine the member doesn't find.
Well, read back through what you've said, because you're reading all the answers as you always do. It'd be nice to actually hear what you thought sometimes. But going back to the question, were you shocked by those? Just answer the question I'm asking. Were you shocked by those terrible figures?
I stand by my comments on my answer, which is, however, unlike some, I do not believe it's skin colour that determines your chances of being a victim or an offender. Does she disagree?
We need to push, actually, the problems within the Black community. We need to help. And if we don't actually spell things out, I'll ask again, were you shocked by those figures? I was shocked and saddened myself. Were you?
I'm astonished you're not aware of these figures. I know these figures because I examine them regularly, and I meet the bereaved families, and I meet them on a regular basis, so it wasn't a shock to me at all.
Well, it must have been, because you gave the wrong figures at the beginning, and the Commissioner actually said, you've both got it wrong. Both you and I gave much lower figures than was the fact, which is why I'm asking you the simple question, were you shocked by those terrible figures?
Well, I'll answer again in two things. Firstly, however, unlike some, I don't think skin colour is the reason why it happens. But secondly, I've been quite clear in my answer what the figures are in relation to both offenders and victims of homicide. But also, I'm sure she'll agree about the disproportionate nature of those living in poor housing, in poverty, suffering school exclusions, unemployment and so forth. Is she shocked by those figures?
I am shocked by the figures, and I'm asking you what we can be doing about it.
Well,
You've given me an answer that went right round the houses as usual.
The first thing we can do is accept there is structural racism and systemic racism in our society, made worse by the policies of this government in the last 11 years. Does she agree with that?
No. You blame the government, Mr Mayor, for everything. You've got a £18 billion budget, and we're here to ask you what you're going to do about various things. What are you going to do to help mothers to stop their sons being involved in crime or becoming a victim? We've got to help this community.
So can I be clear, Chair, does she mean black mothers?
Yes.
Right.
Black mothers who are losing their kids. We've got to... People don't speak out about this for exactly the reason you're proving, because you'll throw back racism as quick as you can. This isn't. We have got to help the black community. Most of the black community would love us to try and find ways of helping their kids.
You know what the black community would like? The black community would like this government to challenge and take on the deep-rooted inequalities that exist in our society. Black Londoners are suffering ingrained social and economic issues. Black Londoners are suffering poverty, suffering inequality, suffering high unemployment, suffering from school exclusion, suffering from poor mental health. And the conditions of those black Londoners suffering those poor conditions has been made worse over the last 11 years. From City Hall, with our limited budgets over the last 5 years, we've been tackling the complex causes of crime, and those include taking on issues around poor housing, taking on issues around poverty. And what the member doesn't seem to understand is, with unemployment increasing in parts of London, they're directly linked with those parts of London with the highest serious youth violence.
Well, the thing
youth
is,
unemployment,
Mr. Mayor,
5 out of 10 of the boroughs
Mr.
with
Mayor,
the highest...
just answer the
youth...
questions.
Chair,
Don't go off,
don't go
off at a different... You don't do it for your own benefit. Just
Assembly
answer
Member
the
Hall,
questions.
Assembly Member Hall, please allow the Mayor to answer the question.
Hallelujah, praise the Lord. So 5 out of 10 boroughs with the highest youth unemployment also have highest serious youth violence. Youth unemployment, going on from unemployment generally, is also linked with issues of violence. The top 10 boroughs with the highest child poverty have the highest amounts of violence as well. When you look at the violent crime increases, they're all taking place in those boroughs with the highest poverty. We're doing both suppressing violence with additional police in those communities, but also at the same time taking on and tackling the root causes of some of this violence, which is why we're investing more monies with helping young people, giving them constructive alternatives to do, whether it's culture, whether it's education, whether it's support, whether it's mentorship, but also at the same time make sure those black men have got decent living wage jobs, because they've suffered from the last 11 years with the consequences of austerity.
Well, clearly it's not working then, is it?
Well, let's deal with what's working.
Well, it's not working because just let me finish. It's clearly not working because the Commissioner gave us those shocking figures. So instead of trying to blame the government for everything, instead of going around the houses with your answers, why don't we all try our very best to help this particular community? And none of us should be afraid of talking about it. We should be talking about how we can help this community. My time is up because all you do is go round the houses and blame everybody else. Remember, you do have an £18 billion budget, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
I'm assuming, Chair, you're going to rule that speech was allowed and not a question. I can't answer.
I wouldn't want to get in the way of Assembly Member Desai, who wishes to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, I could go on and on, but I think there's some serious issues here, but I'm limited for time. So I'll just come straight to the point. Mr. Mayor, it is welcome news that new analysis from City Hall shows that all types of serious violence experienced by young people have fallen over the last 4 years and were falling in London before the pandemic. However, it is a concern that this research also highlights that all 10 of the boroughs that you just referred to, with the highest rates of victims of serious violence, have higher rates of child poverty than the London average. Given the continued link between poverty and youth violence, and I'm glad that you mentioned issues around structural inequality, structural racism and entrenched inequalities, how many more young Londoners could be supported if City Hall was not plugging gaps in welfare and youth services created by this government and the austerity cuts?
Absolutely. And you can understand why they don't like it. Because at the same time as they've created a hostile environment, they have the audacity to cry crocodile tears about the inequalities in our society, which they've exacerbated by a number of their policies. We've got one hand tied behind our back because of austerity on our police, and one hand tied behind our back because of the cuts in public services, in schools, in youth services, and so forth. So over the course of the next 12 months, we're going to be supporting nearly 100,000 additional Londoners, giving them support around mentoring and other things as well. And we'll be focusing on Mesh in those parts of London which have the highest levels of deprivation, which also, by the way, have a disproportionate numbers of black Londoners living as well.
And the final point, the parts of London they talk about, let me talk about my constituency, Tower Hamlets. I've seen the effects of the funding the City Hall provides to the Violence Crime Reduction Unit and the Young Londoners Fund. My ENDS project, I went to a football tournament on the Isle of Dogs, about 100 young people there. That's the way to, to give young people alternatives. And also second chances, those Spani Trust in just off Brick Lane. But, again, hard figures, 80 young people diverted away from crime. Small in numbers, but every person counts. And that's the way forward.
Absolutely. Every life we transform in a positive sense is making a big difference there, and it's really important we don't demonise an entire community. More than 99% of black Londoners, peaceful, lawful, constructive, and sweeping generalisations about skin colour, as some like to do, is not helpful.
So it's not just about offering hope, Mr. Mayor, but also action that you're doing through the Young Londoners Fund and the work of the Violence Crime Reduction Unit. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I think it's appropriate to take a 5-minute break. I know there was a request for a longer break, but it doesn't work with the Mayor's timetable, I'm afraid. So 5 minutes from now. Thank you very much, just for 5 minutes. Thank you. We're back in session. Rebecca Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the record, we still have Assemblymember Pigeon with us virtually and then other members in the room. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question on the agenda is from Assemblymember Prince, and it concerns dial-a-ride.
Mayor, can you... Mike.
Centre button, Mr. Mayor.
No.
If you, can you press the button in the middle till the light comes on? That's the one.
Is that working?
That's it.
Thanks, Keith. Appreciate it. Sorry, apologies.
Wouldn't want to miss a single word.
I'm hoping that somebody can add Keith's time back on. I'm incredibly proud that dial-a-ride continues to help older and disabled Londoners move around our city with confidence at no cost to them. Since the 29th of November, the start of the busiest period for customer trips, dial-a-ride services have run until 10 p.m. Only Assemblymember Prince could turn this positive story into a negative one. Services will continue to operate at these extended hours throughout the festive period until the 3rd of January, allowing members to visit shops, see friends and family, or visit their GP at this important time of year, as well as improving members' ability to attend evening events hosted by clubs and other activities through the festive season, as long as they are safe. All TfL services are now operating in a context of financial constraint, and to ensure TfL can continue to provide vital services to the Londoners that need them the most, it is crucial that TfL receives a long-term sustainable funding deal from government. I would hope that all members of the London Assembly, even those who support this government blindly, would lobby the government for a fair long-term deal rather than supporting an approach that seeks to punish Londoners, particularly older and less mobile Londoners, for doing the right thing during the pandemic. Any decision to make permanent changes to dial-a-ride operating hours will need to take into account TfL's funding situation and what hours of operation TfL's budget will allow. I should add that service planning decisions also take into account any changes in how the service is being used. Customer demand for dial-a-ride services remains significantly reduced as a result of the pandemic. At present, demand stands at just over 40% of pre-COVID levels, and we're seeing different patterns of use to those seen before the pandemic. Between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m., this is before Omicron, demand is currently at 1/3 of previous levels. TfL will continue to monitor this and ensure it's able to manage any further increases.
Right. First of all, I'd like to wish you a Merry Christmas in spite of the attack. And thank you very much for the lovely carol service last week. Thank you. If you think I'm being negative, and if standing up for my residents is being negative, then I'm quite happy to be negative. And I'm going to forgive you, Mr. Mayor, because I think you probably don't understand, and I don't mean that in a rude way either. But I'm just going to give you an example. One of my constituents who wanted to go to the local pantomime tried to book a trip home at 9 p.m, but they were told that the latest that they could book the trip home, this is in spite of the service allegedly going on till 10 o'clock, the latest they could book the trip home was 8:30. And the reason for that is because if they were to pick the customer up at 9 p.m, that would be too late for the driver to get back to the yard by 10 p.m. So this 10 p.m, you may not be aware of this, so that's why I'm going to forgive you. This 10 p.m. deadline is for when the bus has to be back at the yard. And I don't think that 9 p.m. is 10 p.m. If in reality they're saying that all the latest trip that you can take is 9 p.m, then I think they should be honest about that.
Well, let me deal with that, Chair. There's 2 points the member raises. Firstly, that he's standing up for residents. Well, he appears to have lost his voice when it comes to standing up for his residents and asking the government to give TfL the support it needs as a consequence of the pandemic, rather than
that's not true either, Mr. Mayor, because you know that I was the person who instigated the round robin that went to the Transport Minister asking for the £500 million to come back to London. I instigated that, we agreed that, and then it was only me who didn't get to sign it. So I'm not having that.
Well, hold on a sec. The government has asked us to raise additional funds on top of the revenues already raised of £500 million.
Yeah, but you said I didn't speak up, Mr. Mayor. I did speak up. I supported you to get that £500 million.
You've got a chance now to unequivocally criticise the government's approach to London. to explain how you support the Mayor and the majority of decent members of the Assembly in objection to the anti-London approach from the government, and to say that the government's wrong to punish London this way. And we'll look forward to you saying that during the course of this Mayor's question time. The second point you raised is that that people can't book a service or dial a ride after 9 p.m. That's not true. But if it's the case that your constituent received that information, I'm more than happy to look into it. If that's the advice he was given, that was wrong, because it's possible to book trips up until 10 p.m.
Right, well, that's what I'd ask you. Would you ensure, Mr Mayor, that 10 p.m. means 10 p.m?
Spot on.
Thank you.
For many of these people, you know, because you spend time with them, they're lonely, they're isolated. This is their one chance to get out and meet people.
And these are the least mobile people we have, so we have to stand up for them, and that's what I'm doing. But also, will you, Mr Mayor, and please don't repeat what you've already said, because I accept what you've said. Can you please ensure that we do run this after Christmas and that it is a permanent basis up to 10 o'clock? These are the least mobile people that we have in this city, Mr Mayor, and we need this service up till 10 o'clock, proper 10 o'clock, ongoing, not just for Christmas.
Let me be quite clear, because your residents may be watching. We can't guarantee that Dial-A-Ride will carry on as it has in the past unless we get long-term support from the government. And so I'm afraid I can't give them that reassurance.
But will you make it a priority, Mr Mayor?
I'll make it a priority to get a deal from the government, and any help you can give, bearing in mind you're from the same tribe, will be appreciated.
Thank you.
The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Cooper, and it concerns London Power.
Thank you, Chair. I launched London Power in January 2020 to give Londoners access to energy that's always fair, affordable and green. London Power was set up as a partnership with an existing energy supplier, as it was less risky, less costly and faster than starting from scratch. Recent events have shown we were right to take that approach. We have confidence in our partner Octopus Energy as a financially stable company with a prudent hedging strategy. They recently secured significant private investment and were also chosen by Ofgem to take on 580,000 customers from a failed energy supplier, demonstrating their confidence in the company. Since London Power's launch, 32 other energy suppliers have failed, including Bulb, the largest energy company to fail for nearly 2 decades. While the government's energy price cap protects Londoners from the full effects of high prices, sadly, tens of thousands of London households are still likely to plunge into fuel poverty this winter. London Power currently has over 6,000 customers receiving great value, green energy and excellent customer service, rating 4.9 out of 5 on Trustpilot. I want even more Londoners to benefit. However, across the industry, current fixed-term quotes for new customers are far above price-capped variable tariffs. Like most responsible companies, London Power is encouraging customers to stay with their current supplier for now. This will impact the entire market and is leading to extremely low customer switching levels this winter. Industry experts expect energy bills to increase further from next April, when the price cap is revised upwards. I'm encouraging all Londoners to check then if switching to London Power could save them money, and I'm working with boroughs to help spread this message. The most vulnerable households will continue to need more help. That's why I've promoted the availability of financial support to vulnerable customers through my Warmer Homes Advice service. And I recently announced a £51 million package to tackle fuel poverty to help Londoners stay warm through this winter and improve the energy efficiency of thousands of homes.
See, it's a difficult situation that we find ourselves in. We had an increase in 12% of the price cap has just happened. And as you've just said yourself, I mean, I think there's going to be a really difficult situation come April. But I wanted to hear from you that Londoners could be assured that the strength of Octopus behind London Power means that at that point, when people who are on fixed deals that are coming to an end, that if they choose to switch, that London Power is a good place for them to go. And I know it's been really difficult, especially with Bulb, because it was larger than quite a few of the others that were no longer able to continue.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a really important point, and the best advice we can give is for people to do their research at the time. because it could be there are other deals out there. I mean, and switching used to be hard, but it's now easier. People often don't switch. I mean, London Power has been brilliant in relation to the price guarantees, the renewables, the green energy, and so it's really important people check before they switch. But the advice is not to switch now. And even London Power, which is remarkably responsible, is saying, don't come to us now because we're not sure we can give you the good deal you want. You may have a better deal with the cap, which is great from them to say so. And so when it comes to the price cap ending next spring, people should do their homework.
Sorry to interrupt. Assembly Member, if you could move your microphone a little closer, it's quite difficult to hear you.
Sure. Ofgem have already stated that they are expecting to see this significant rise, with the Andrew Marsh show predicting that the rise in April is going to cost the average household more than £420 a year. In London, because of the low take-up of eco, a lot of Londoners are in this very bad situation in leaky old houses, and it's not like we're going to knock them all down and suddenly replace them all with new ones. With the current rise hitting Londoners hard already and with families struggling, what else can we do to ensure that Londoners, and particularly the most vulnerable Londoners, are protected and secure if this further rise happens in April, which seems inevitable? Could you tell us more about your home programme?
So, I mean, firstly, thank you for the job you've been doing, publicising this to your constituents. I mean, the three big things we can offer is the Warmer Homes programme. The Warmer Homes programme helps you make your home less inefficient and more efficient. For example, solid wall insulation, heat pumps and solar panels. It's means tested for obvious reasons. We want to help lower income people living in fuel poverty. Separately, the Warmer Homes Advice Service gives people advice on what they can do in relation to energy advice, other things they can do, energy saving measures. And the third thing is London Power themselves offer a £140 Warm Homes discount bill for eligible households. So we're doing what we can with the limited resources we have, but I think you've talked about publicly, I know, the concerns you have about increasing energy prices affecting vulnerable people. You know, that's one of the reasons why it's so important for the government to give support what it can to those families receiving universal credit, to get rid of the welfare benefit cap, and so forth, which is causing a real problem for these families. It's a double whammy.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just in listening to your answers and understanding the way your view of the market at the moment, are London Power still on track to meet the target of at least breaking even by 2024?
I'm not sure. I'd be surprised if they were, in light of what we've seen over the last few months, but also the additional customers they've taken on board. But also they've not been, and we've not been helping them get new customers for obvious reasons that I referred to in answer to the question, because although that would mean we'd meet a target, we could tick a box and we'd break even. The problem is we'd be taking on customers who are paying more in their bills. So in terms of macro, we'd be doing well, but in terms of micro, the individual, we would be not helping Londoners. And so it's really important to understand the consequences of the impact on the energy markets on individual companies who are going bust, but also other companies who can take a new business, agree not to, because the price they're offering isn't equivalent to the cap price they have.
Thanks. I understand that. And given that answer, would you know when you'll be able to make a reassessment in working with London Power of when the company will be breaking even?
So I'm more than happy to get the relevant officer to write to the member, but in the meantime, those customers who are using London Power are benefiting from obviously huge discounts, green energy that's renewable, and once it's sensible to be taking on more customers, working with boroughs, housing providers, they'll be doing so. But until we've done that, we can't really give a proper assessment of income streams going forward for London Power. I'm not sure if she's suggesting that we could. I'm not sure.
Thanks.
Thank you. We now go on to questioning in the name of Assembly Member Pidgeon, and it concerns TfL income streams.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the member for her question. In good faith, TfL has met all the conditions in the last funding agreement, one of which was to conduct a review of potential new income sources, a short list of options was submitted to the government by TfL as required on the 27th of August, more than 3.5 months ago. We made it clear in August that we wanted a dialogue with the government so we could move forward in partnership together. The government did not respond for over 2.5 months, and only at the 11th hour did TfL receive limited and partial feedback from the government. I'm disappointed that even now we're still waiting for the government to engage properly on a matter that is of such critical importance to both the capital and the wider UK economy. As I've said, the fairest way to raise new income for TfL would be for the government to let us keep the £500 million Londoners pay every year in vehicle excise duty, which is currently used almost entirely outside London. This means because the government's ruled this out, this means we've been left with no alternative but to plan to increase council tax in London by around £20 a year on average from next year and over the following 2 years. At a time when inflation is at a 10-year high, the government's already required TfL to increase fares by RPI plus 1%, and there are some changes to fare structures and ticketing that will also have to be made to meet the government's demands. Subject to impact assessment and consultation, these changes are likely to include applying an all-day peak fare for tube journeys to Heathrow on the Piccadilly line, increasing the Oyster card deposit from £5 to £7, withdrawing from the travel card agreement, making permanent a 9 a.m. start for the 60-plus photo card and the older person's Freedom Pass, slowly increasing the age of eligibility for free travel using the 60-plus pass. Everyone who has this card currently would keep it, and everyone who's due to get it in the next few years will still get one, but just a bit later than they'd perhaps expected. I'm also asking TfL to look into whether we could retain the eligibility age for 60 for the poorest Londoners. Even with the additional revenue we're being forced to raise, TfL will still have to make significant cuts to bus and tube services, planning on the basis of managed decline.
Thank you very much for your answer, and it's an absolute bleak assessment of TfL's finances, and I won't be able to get into the detail of your answer, but my goodness, some horrors in there. Obviously, urgent action, sort of progressive thinking is going to be needed for long-term sustainable funding. At present, you have numerous different road charges in London, which the boundaries and charges of which are somewhat crude. Do you think that now is probably the perfect opportunity to seriously consider the benefits of introducing a smart road pricing system in London?
So the soonest we could bring in revenues, assuming all the other hurdles were overcome in relation to technology, the scale, the cost, so forth, would be around 2025, 2026. The government's requiring us to bring £500 million from 2023. So if you're able to persuade the government to delay the demands for another 3 years, we can have a conversation. But I'm afraid the government's demands are for now rather than sometime down the road.
Yeah, I'm thinking longer term because clearly this isn't going to go away. I appreciate it can't happen overnight.
I mean, on that,
another. Could I just ask? I'm very limited with time, Mr. Mayor. Nottingham introduced a workplace parking levy back in 2011. They raised about 75 million from that, which has been used to invest in transport networks. Only 2 London boroughs are currently looking at this, even though I know you've issued guidance to the boroughs on setting this up. Will you look at developing perhaps a trial workplace parking levy scheme in London?
Well, I was the minister that began conversations with Nottingham about the workplace parking levy, and you're right, it's brought in revenues. We are looking at all options. In relation to the car parking you referred to, a lot of this is a negotiation with London councils and who would get the share of the revenues and stuff. So we've got to be cognizant of that. And you'll be aware, for those watching may not be, is we're only responsible for 5% of the roads in London. The other 95% are council roads. And so we are speaking to London councils. They will also see a massive reduction in the TIF money they receive if we don't get more support from the government. So everyone's got skin in the game.
Exactly, and it does affect the boroughs too. Finally, the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone, it appears to have been a great success, but I wonder whether you might consider taking it further. Such an expansion could be a really good opportunity to both generate revenue and tackle emissions. So what consideration have you given to further expand the ultra-low emission zone to cover the whole of London? And could you send me any work that's been done on this to date?
So you'll be aware we brought forward the ultra-low emission zone expansion. in October. The government were against that. And now the government is saying that could be one of the methods you use to raise additional revenues. Because London has done the right thing, 92% are compliant within the zone, 82% compliant outside the zone. The government are complaining it's not bringing in the revenues they were hoping it brings in. We're damned if we do and damned if we don't.
Delivering what it should.
And so I'm more than happy, Senator Pigeon, for TfL to share with you any work they've done. It's subject to privacy issues and stuff, because it's important for you to be aware. And by the way, by Londoners doing the right thing and being compliant, it's improving the air quality, which is saving the NHS money, it's increasing productivity. But rather than the government seeing the bigger picture, their crude assessment is the revenues being brought in aren't what they hoped.
Could I ask you? You finished. Sorry,
Thank you very much.
Liberal
Very
Democrat
much.
group are now.
Merry
out of time.
Christmas.
You too, Caroline.
Thank you. The next 3 questions have been withdrawn. So the next question. Oh, I beg your pardon, Assembly Member Garrett, you did, and I do apologise.
Thank you. Since obviously we're just talking about TfL's income streams, and part of TfL's income now comes from the ULEZ charge, which we've just been talking about, which is also levied on charities such as the Fantastic Dogs on the Street, which I'd like to raise. They run a mobile vet, and they provide care for pet dogs where someone is homeless or sleeping rough. But more than that, they work in partnership with the London Ambulance Service. So they provide where someone is being taken away in the ambulance, they can provide emergency support for their pet. If someone is suffering domestic violence and needs to go into a shelter, they can provide support, foster support for the dog, so that's looked after. And they also work with the police. So when someone is arrested or sectioned and there would otherwise be a dog left by itself, they can take that into foster care. And so it's not just about what they do, it's about what they're enabling others to do and the knock-on effect that would have if they had to stop. And they've told me this morning that they may have to stop at Christmas. And as a charity, they're struggling to pay their daily ULEZ charge, and they can't afford to replace their sort of specialist dog ambulance. And I don't think it was anyone's intention to put a charity like this and the work that they do at risk when the ULEZ was expanded. So I wonder, Mr. Mayor, whether you'd agree for the Deputy Mayor to meet with Dogs on the Street and try to explore the work that they're doing and how that can be supported to continue, because I don't think this is a sort of desired ramification of the ULEZ expansion.
Yeah, Chair, I'm really happy for TfL and the Deputy Mayor to meet with the charity to discuss a resolution to the consequences of ULEZ on their brilliant work the charity does.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and Merry Christmas.
You too, mate. You too.
Thanks very much. And apologies to Assembly Member Garrett. There was about 12 things going on at the same time, and I don't multitask. So the next 3 questions are withdrawn. And so the next question is in the name of Assembly Member Clark, and that concerns surface water flooding.
Thank you, Chair. And can I thank you for your continued interest in this matter, which is really important, I know, for your constituents and many others across our great city. London can't eliminate surface water flooding entirely, but we can plan and prepare to reduce the impact. Our environment strategy, London plan policies and climate resilience programmes are already making a difference. I set up, as you said, a roundtable immediately after the July flooding. It has met a further 3 times and identified actions to improve partner response to future incidents. The meetings led to the London Resilience Partnership conducting an expedited review of the response to the flooding incidents, setting out 30 recommendations. A task and finish group chaired by London councils and the Environment Agency, and including organisations with direct responsibilities for flooding, was established to make recommendations on our city's longer-term resilience to surface water flooding. It will report early next year. Roundtable members have already streamlined public flood communications and ensured Londoners can reach a single point of contact for assistance if flooded. They've improved the Resilience Partnership response through improving communications and sharing data. And last month, I ran the 4th London Flood Awareness Week alongside the Environment Agency's Flood Action Week, focusing specifically on surface water. I've contributed over £20 million since 2016 to help London adapt to climate change, but we need more investment from the government to keep pace with climate change. The Task and Finish group is examining how long-term strategic planning in London can help us adapt our homes, communities and city to the risk of flash flooding. We need new, improved data and evidence on how to manage the risk and communicate with the public about flood risk. I'll publish a progress report in the new year on how the relevant groups are working to improve London's resilience to service water flooding both in the short and longer term.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for all your work on this. Just quickly, is the GLA participating in the Thames Water's independent review of the sewer network to see if any issues with its operations contributed to the July 2021 flooding that we saw in my constituency and across London? And that's to ensure that similar issues don't arise this winter.
Yeah, I mean, this is such an important issue, and I'm not sure London's realised how important it is. We are. But the good news is Thames Water we're also an integral part of our roundtable as well. But just to reassure you, there is joined upness, as you'd expect and demand from us.
And have a wonderful Christmas. Thank you.
You too.
The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Prince and concerns Bike Safe.
Thank you, Chair. Bike Safe is a national police-led motorcycle safety scheme with 36 participating forces, including the Met Police Service. The aim of the scheme is to work with motorcycle riders to provide workshops on safety and hazard awareness. The workshops are classroom-based sessions where officers discuss the areas of danger relevant to motorcyclists and work through how to keep the rider safer. From there, the riders are taken on observed rides in urban and rural settings so that an experienced police motorcyclist can give them feedback on their riding. The purpose of the Bike Safe programme is to reduce casualties amongst motorcyclists, as it is recognised that they're one of the most vulnerable road user groups. According to TfL data, motorcyclists only account for 2% of road users in London, but they are disproportionately represented in the numbers of those killed and seriously injured on London's roads. Bike Safe is delivered by the MPS Motorcycle Safety Team, which is part of the Roads and Transport Policing Command. The team is entirely funded by TfL as part of their contract with the MPS. It consists of 1 sergeant and 6 constables who, when they are not delivering Bike Safe workshops, proactively patrol recognised casualty hotspots. They also provide specialist motorcycle support with crime-related matters to other units within the RTPC and wider MPS. The London workshops are currently run from 8 venues across the capital to ensure even coverage across the city. The MPS provides around 50% of the total workshops nationwide, and it's the only force that offers the course to provisional licence holders. The Motorcycle Safety Team have delivered courses to around 600 people in 2021, covering a mix of riders, including couriers, people engaged in the gig economy, commuters, and those who use their motorcycles for social riding. The team has led the way on a project to deliver a bespoke workshop for couriers. I'm pleased that the Met Police Service is doing so much good work to support motorcycle safety.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is a good scheme. Do you think you could do more, though, to promote this more widely? I think there's a lot of, especially provisional motorcyclists or powered two-wheelers, who are not aware of these courses. And I think it would be very helpful if you could promote it more widely, but also if perhaps the Deputy Mayor could engage with some of the larger delivery companies to make them aware that their delivery staff could actually engage and benefit from the benefits of these courses.
Chair, I'm more than happy to take offline any ideas the member has. He's obviously a keen motorcyclist, but he knows when you see 2% users versus 25% being killed or serious injury, there must be more we can do. And so I'm more than happy to listen to any ideas you've got, because we've got to be doing much more. And this course is available. There's a waiting list, but let's get more and more people being aware of this and doing it.
Okay, and then finally, would you sort of redouble your efforts, please, to try and persuade boroughs to let motorcyclists use the bus lanes that they run?
Well, I'm afraid that the season of goodwill may have just ended at that moment, because you'll be aware of the concerns around not just congestion, but also emissions caused by motorcycles. But we can, again, talk about this offline.
So, Mr. Mayor, you can't accuse motorcyclists of causing congestion, I don't think.
Well, I'm more than happy to explain to you the braking distance rules that apply to motorcycles and the distance between vehicle A and vehicle B, compared and contrast, for example, walking and cycling.
I'd love to have that conversation with you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Moema, and it concerns housing delivery.
Thank you, Chair. In 2019 and 2020, we started more than 17,000 low-cost homes to rent and buy through our Affordable Homes programme, and more council homes were started across the capital in that year than in any year since 1993. But this year, we've beaten that record, with most council homes begun in any year since the 1970s. And yesterday, I was in Southwark with Deputy Mayor Dom Copley visiting good examples of council homes being built in our great city. The housing shortage hits Londoners on low incomes hardest, so our new affordable homes programme focuses on building the social rented homes they need. More than half of those social rental homes will be delivered by councils. Since I was elected in 2016, the proportion of affordable homes in developments referred to the Mayor for approval has almost doubled from 22% under the old dodgy definition to 40% under the more stringent affordable homes definition. To deliver action now, we're also working with boroughs to tackle the worst effects of the housing shortage, including helping those sleeping rough or living in temporary accommodation. This includes my Right to Buy Back Fund, which is supporting boroughs to buy back former council homes that can be then used to house homeless families. But we also need the government to step up and give us the funding to build at a scale that matches London's needs for new affordable homes. The government must also ensure we get the necessary investment in our infrastructure. For example, the support for the extension of the DLR towards Beckton Riverside and Thamesmead would unlock 30,000 new homes. Failure to agree a long-term funding settlement for TfL puts important transport projects at risk and makes it harder to deliver the new homes we desperately need.
Thank you, Mayor Khan. And let me be that annoying person to say I'm really pleased to hear that you've met a deadline which started before I was born. So congratulations. That record is really amazing to hear.
Can I say, as the recipient of that, it is really annoying.
Okay, good. That's intended. My question was about just really to understand what are the challenges that the sector faces this year, through the winter, rather. We know that Savills has talked about, you've talked about the record of delivery, which is really good. Savills talks about the proportion of sub-market homes, their terminology, but the number of homes that have been delivered, 7,900 since 2015-16, and then there's that obviously that need, which we are working much faster to meet, and the right to buy back is a big part of that, as well as, you know, something close to my heart, supporting Afghan refugees. I just wonder how we're going to overcome, however, some of those challenges that are already bubbling up with inflation and building costs being affected, and how we're going to prepare for the coming months to make sure that we can continue to deliver and meet that target.
Look, I mean, I chaired this week the Homes for Londoners board, and you're spot on about the prevailing winds that are affecting construction. You've got a labour shortage exacerbated by Brexit. You've got a supplies shortage. You've got the construction inflation way above normal inflation, which as it is at a 10-year high. You've got those who already are responsible for housing worried about the remediation required, which has been brought to light by Grenfell, and so forth and so forth. So it's a big, big challenge that we've got, and we can't pretend it's not going to be challenging. That's why breaking the record last year is so impressive in that context. It's going to be tough. Linked to that, we've got the eviction ban being lifted, which means you'll have more people potentially being made homeless. We're already seeing rough sleeping going up, particularly for young people, with the capital city. People not unreasonably come to the capital city when it comes to leaving their village, town or city across the country. And we've had a delay with the Renters Reform Bill as well. So the Section 21 changes we were lobbying for has been delayed. At the same time, throw into that private rents are going up as well. So it's really hard. It's really difficult. And so we continue to work with the government. I had a very good meeting with Michael Gove. I was impressed, I was impressed by his willingness to listen. He appeared to understand the challenges we've faced. I also understand he's been addressing some of the concerns raised by the Grenfell community in relation to their concerns about some of the policies announced by Robert Jenrick. But there was also the issues around, for example, the EWS1 scheme and so forth and so forth. So there are so many problems. And we're hoping that Michael Gove, as a new Secretary of State, works with us and the industry, leaseholders, residents, renters and so forth to try and improve what is still a crisis.
Thank you. And I also wanted to just ask you about the potential impact of the lack of a funding deal on some of the amazing schemes and additional homes that we really desperately need across the capital. Obviously, both housing and transport are intricately linked, and we don't want people to be having to factor in from the very beginning of a new development that it will be car-led, and it is absolutely essential that new homes, where possible, are close to transport hubs. We've had conversations here about whether it's appropriate or not to build on car parks. It seems, and stations, it seems the ideal place to deliver affordable homes. There is zero commute. But I just wonder, what does that mean for unlocking new homes across the capital and, more importantly, into those outer London zones as well?
I know, this is so important. The only time that I comes before H is when you talk about infrastructure for housing. Right? You've got to have the infrastructure there to support the housing. The Secretary of State came along for the opening of the Northern Line extension, paid for by Londoners, by the way. That extension on the Northern Line, 2 stations, 9 Elms Palace Power Station, has led to more than 25,000 homes, tens of thousands of jobs. But hold on a sec. What about the potential homes we could build in Beckton, in Greenwich, 30,000 homes, which will be sacrificed? The 600 homes in Colindale, Barnet, which will be sacrificed. The tens of thousands of homes if the Baker Line extension south was to take place, which will be sacrificed. That's why it's nonsensical for the government to say they want to address the housing crisis, but not give TfL the funding we need. That's why it's so important for the government to work with us in a partnership to try and resolve this, to make sure that we can both make sure public transport helps our businesses flourish and thrive, but also helps unlock the housing, which is so important for a capital city like London.
Okay. Thank you.
Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr Mayor, how does it help London's housing shortage to continually waste time and resources on proposing ugly tower blocks on suburban TfL car parks, such as the Cannons Park scheme that was recently rejected by the planning inspector?
Well, I'm of the opinion we haven't got a shortage of car parks crisis. We've got a shortage of genuinely affordable housing crisis. And you'll be aware that Conservative Hillingdon recently challenged through the courts planning decision that I took in relation to a tall building in Hillingdon. And thankfully, the judges agreed with me and our policies rather than Tory Hillingdon.
But they didn't on the Cannons Park scheme. So will you learn
That
the
wasn't
lessons
the court,
from
that
that
was the Secretary
rejection?
of State. That
Sorry.
wasn't the court, that was the Secretary of State.
So will you learn the lessons of the rejection and withdraw TfL's schemes at Arnos Grove and Stanmore, rather than waste further time and resources in seeking to overturn the local democratic decisions by Enfield and Harrow councils to reject these schemes?
Well, if I'd listened to your representations, we still have a dodgy definition of what an affordable home was, one costing almost £500,000, or one where you pay 80% of market rent. If I'd listened to your representations, we still have 22% of homes being given affordable permission from me rather than 40%, as is currently the case. If I'd listened to your representations, we wouldn't have broken the record last year for the most numbers of council homes begun since the 1970s. If I'd listened to your representations, we wouldn't have broken the record last year of the most genuinely affordable homes begun of more than 17,500. If we'd listened to your representations, we wouldn't have changed the definition to include one where you pay council rent, where you pay London living rent a third of average earnings, or one that's shared ownership part by part rent. I think Londoners are grateful that I've not been listening to you, as was seen in the results in May, where your candidate, who's not here today, Sean Bailey, lost and lost badly.
Yeah. Can you answer the questions? I know it's obviously difficult for you.
More
the
than happy
actual
to.
question
Ask the question.
isn't written down.
Ask the question rather than a speech.
I keep asking you questions. You do not answer properly. You don't answer any of my colleagues.
Is that a speech
properly.
or a question?
You do answer Labour's.
Is that a speech or a question?
And will you withdraw TfL's schemes at Arnos Grove and Stanmore because the democratic decisions of Enfield and Harrow councils that they wanted to reject these schemes? And I perhaps should remind you, they are Labour councils.
One of the reasons why we have a strategic planning authority is to for the mayor to consider those schemes above a certain height and above a certain scale. For those reasons, it'd be inappropriate for me to comment on schemes that may come to me or the Deputy Mayor, because I serve as a quasi-judicial function. I'm more than happy, though, to listen to representations from councils or residents or developers or those who live nearby, as I do often when I hear a planning decision that comes to me. And indeed, members of the Assembly can also come along and make representations, as sometimes the good ones do.
Oh dear. You are in such a mood
Is that a
today,
question?
aren't you?
Is that a
Do
question?
you not agree that if TfL had proposed more reasonable schemes on those sites, they could already have started building homes by now, rather than seeking to undermine local democracy, which you do seem in favour of?
Well, 33 of the schemes the council, 33 of the schemes TfL has put forward to councils, 32 of them, the officers have recommended permission. By my rough maths, that's a 97% success rate. that's not bad.
Well, do you believe in local democracy, Mr Mayor?
As somebody who actually sat on the planning committee for 12 years, I think it's really important for planning officers to make recommendations to councillors who can decide the small schemes. The big schemes, though, I think there's a strategic role for the Mayor as the planning authority to look at those. That's one of the reasons why we have a London plan, which was finally signed off and approved by the Secretary of State almost a year after it was submitted this May. The London plan sets out the rules in relation to developments. Londoners this May re-elected me by record numbers, which means I have a mandate from Londoners to deliver on the London plan. And one of the things Londoners want is for us to address the housing crisis, which is what we're doing. With more support from the government, we could make more progress. According to experts across London, if the government was to give us support financially of £4.7 billion a year, we could finally have the supply of housing meeting the demand.
Mr Mayor, you've had billions. I'm sure somebody will pick that up. I'm absolutely disgusted by the way you ignore local democracy.
Is that a question,
You
Chair?
do not want to know.
Is that a question, Chair?
I'm not going to ask another one, Chairman, on the basis he spends hours wasting our time.
Thank you. The next question is from Assembly Member Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Mayor. And as somebody who serves as a local councillor, I very much appreciate local democracy. And I was just really confused why it is that the Barnet Conservatives have highlighted a number of car parks as a place that we could intensify housing, and then their own Conservative MP turns up protesting outside of City Hall to protest about Finchley Central, High Barnet stations, which initially turned up on the Barnet local plan, supported by Tory Barnet councillors, and then all of a sudden we've got the Barnet Tories protesting outside City Hall to save car parks. I'm just a bit confused, actually, by this. I mean, my recommendation to Teresa Villiers was to go back and have a conversation with Barnet Council and her own Tory councillors about that, rather than bringing her protests to City Hall and having a real conversation with us about actually delivering the homes that London needs, but not playing silly political games with it.
But isn't the answer obvious with respect that rather than caring about the interest of residents who are desperate for affordable housing, they want to play cheap party politics? And that's one of the reasons why this will be the last time she serves as a member of Parliament in that constituency.
Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. That was a really good question there, Assembly Member Clark. But I saw that the Mayor didn't have.
Is that a
any
question?
problems
Sorry, is that a
answering
question, Chair?
statement. So
Chair, come on, it's 12 o'clock
can I-
now. Try and chair this meeting impartially.
Could you stop interrupting the member and allow
No,
her to ask
no,
a
not really.
question? Thank you.
Okay.
Mr Mayor, I'm in charge here.
Well, act like it impartially, please.
Please just allow the member to ask the question.
If there's a question, sure.
Thank you, and I'm really happy to be able to come here and ask you that question as the additional Conservative member that was voted in at an expense of the Labour, who are a weakened group thanks to London voting against them. So I'm really happy.
Sorry,
to have
Chair,
the
I can't hear. I think the microphone's not on, Chair.
I think it is. I can do a bellowing voice if you like. So what I wanted to ask you there is in relation to the funding which you've asked for from government. So you have received almost £9 billion in terms of help towards affordable housing. And I think you just gave a figure there to my colleague, Assembly Member Hall, that you're asking for an extra £4 billion, is that? Or an extra £5 billion that you think you need? So you're asking for between 13 and 14 billion from government in total. Do you recognise that you've been given quite an unprecedented amount for affordable housing?
Okay, let me deal with the various points raised in what I think was a question, which is City Hall asked a number of experts across London, developers, those who sit on G15, councils, those who are responsible for developing the private sector, what sort of funding would be required to meet the demands of our city. And bearing in mind, the last time we built the homes our city needed was in the 1970s, when roughly speaking, there were 20,000 council homes being built a year. These independent experts came up with a figure of, roughly speaking, I think 4.7 billion pounds a year to meet the needs of our city, because the supply of houses and homes to our city is far below the demands of our city. According to independent experts, we need, roughly speaking, 55,000 homes a year. So even though last year I broke the record over the last 40 years of the most number of council homes begun, 4,689, it is still way below the numbers of council homes that we require, about 20,000 a year. The only way you're going to build council homes is through subsidy from central government. At the same time, you've got housing associations who are able to provide affordable homes through cross-subsidy by selling off their market value homes, and sometimes luxury properties from private developers help subsidise affordable homes. We're not going to meet the needs of our city without a massive injection of capital from the government. But the second big point is in relation to the planning reforms required. Oliver Letwin was asked by Philip Hammond, a previous Chancellor, to do some work in relation to why it is there are 200,000 homes being granted permission in London to be built that haven't been built. And one of the things that Oliver Letwin concluded was we needed a diversity of houses and homes being provided in London. Yes, market value homes, and yes, even some luxury homes, but also genuinely affordable homes, and that can only be funded from help from the government. And that's the report that was done. And Chair, I'm more than happy to send a copy of the report to the member of the Assembly who's not read this, which I find astonishing as somebody who claims to be concerned about the needs of our great city. But I'll make sure that's sent to the member so she can see what the experts said about the needs of our city from the government.
Thank you. That's certainly not the case, Mr. Mayor, but what I'm trying to ask, and you still didn't ask, so you've been given £9 billion from government, which has enabled that the affordable homes building, which you believe has been a success. So it is with that grant. So let me ask it in a way that perhaps is simpler for you. In the end of this term, how much more money than that £9 billion do you think you need from government?
£4.7 billion a year.
So you need that in the set. So you're hoping for an extra 8 billion from government.
Let me try and explain slowly. So the money the government gave us was from 2016.
You can try and be condescending all you like, Mr. Mayor. I've repeated the figures
give me a
you
chance.
gave to me.
I'll be more so. Give me a chance. So the first tranche of money was from 2016 till 2023, and the second tranche was from 2022 until 2026. So it's not per year. It's from 2016 until 2026. That's 10 years. I'm talking about the expert report which recommended what we require as a city per year. That's the difference.
I think if you spent more time thinking about how you could answer these questions and less ways you could try and insult me over a petty word choice, then you'd probably be in a better position for London.
What's that, pot kettle black?
I don't know if I've offended you in any way, but
Well,
thank you.
Pot kettle black, is it?
I think the Christmas
Chair,
spirit...
the Chair's woken up.
I
Welcome,
think the
Chair.
Christmas spirit has just left the room, so if we could stick to answering questions.
Oh, thank goodness he's woken up.
Assembly Member Best, have you finished?
She's finished, I can assure you that, Chair.
Mr. Mayor, you'll feel much
Oh,
better when
Devon,
you
she's
open your
bellowing.
presents, I'm sure. Assembly Member Cooper, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, we missed some of that, unfortunately, because the microphone, it was a bit difficult. Hopefully you can hear. Well, I think you can hear me because I've just moved the microphone practically. We couldn't actually hear some of what was being said. Sorry.
We also couldn't see some of their members. I can't see where Sean Bailey is. Can you?
I can't see Sean, no. I don't believe he's here today, and I don't think he was here yesterday either at the Police and Crime Committee, although I wasn't there myself. Mr. Mayor, I just wanted
dear, they don't like it, do they?
I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Mayor, about...
Here they go.
You referred to your 12 years on the Planning Committee, which was actually in Wandsworth, which is part of my constituency, and I probably don't really need to remind you of the situation there, but from 1979 onwards, the local council had, it was very committed to house sales, and in fact it had priority group sales areas, which was found to be illegal by the district auditor, so an awful lot of properties were sold off over the years, so there's a great number of leaseholders. And also with the river frontage, there's been a huge number of blocks built along the river frontage for many years under the previous mayor with very little social housing. So many of them are dark at night because they've essentially been sold to overseas investors. I've got a couple of friends who live in Singapore, and they told me they'd seen adverts for blocks there for flats that were going on sale. Also, some people are now living in blocks that have been covered in unsafe cladding. So in Wandsworth we have a perfect storm. There will be 3,300 children in temporary accommodation as we approach the Christmas period, this cold period. Do you think it's acceptable the way that housing was being run before 2016? And what do you think you've been able to do so far to address the issues that you inherited, and what can we see going forward?
Well, I think that's a good example of where I, as Mayor, am stepping in, unapologetically, taking on a council that is, would rather satisfy investors overseas. Okay, nothing wrong with investors overseas or foreigners. What I don't want is them buying precious finite homes using as gold bricks when there are people like you're mentioning who are homeless, not able to get a genuine affordable home in the borough they have been raised in and want to live in. And that's why I will step in and say, you know what, you've got to be providing genuine affordable homes. And that's why I will have a London plan that addresses the needs of our city. And rather than focusing on car owners who live outside London who drive into London to park in these car parks next to a tube station, I'll take them on to build housing that Londoners desperately need, including taking on councils who don't understand the needs of citizens of this city.
There's a very large estate in the western part of Wandsworth in Putney, which is currently stalled. Redrow, as you know, pulled out of further developments in London, and they'd been planning to work on the estate regeneration. The council decided it couldn't be bothered to ballot the residents on the estate and ask them what they thought about any developments there. Do you agree with me that it's really important to ask local people through a ballot if you're planning to transform the local area in a large-scale way? And if there was a ballot in any area in London that is positive about moving forward, that's the kind of scheme that hopefully, if there's money available, City Hall might be willing to invest in to ensure that there is social rented housing available?
Well, the question it begs is, what is the council scared of? Why are you scared to engage and consult with your residents and hold a ballot? You'll be aware, you played a big role in this, that we now require balloting when it comes to the regeneration of a estate if you want money from the City Hall, but also if you're going to be regenerating any council home that's been demolished needs to be replaced and some. And I think many people will be asking the question, why is one council running scared of that?
Absolutely. A number of people have, of course, said exactly that to me. And, of course, Mr Mayor, you have stepped in a couple of times in Wandsworth, including a block that is now being developed as only for social rented housing in an area that was, before that, just for private rented. So local residents will be benefiting from that very soon because it's about to be finished. Thank you.
Absolutely. And those residents will be reminded, I can assure you, about all those who didn't want those homes to go there.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Devenish.
Mr Mayor, if it's all going so well in housing delivery, why is Lord Bob Kerslake reviewing your lack of delivery?
Well, Chair, I'm more than happy to send to the member who's bellowing the terms of reference from the City Hall to Bob Kerslake, which is to make sure that no stone is left unturned to try and maximise delivery across our city. What the member may not realise is City Hall isn't a development company. We don't build homes. One of the things that Lord Kerslake will be looking into is whether we should play a role in relation to development, but also what value we would add. And what I'll be doing is speaking not just to those in the Assembly who want to speak to him, and I'm really pleased, Chair, you've agreed to meet with him, but others who may have views in relation to the future of our city. And if Lord Kerslake says, for example, as the thesis from the Conservatives is that London has more than enough money to build the genuinely affordable homes we need, then of course I'll listen to him.
Well, if you need more money, Mr Mayor, why haven't you built 42,000 of the 116,000 homes that you committed to build nearly 5 years ago? You've not even started 42,000 homes. Why do you need more money when you're not actually doing what you should be doing?
Let me try and respond to the 116,000 target that's been referred to. The 116,000 target is for starts between 2016 and 2023. So far, we've met every target set by the government and agreed with the government, including, as I said, breaking records. The best way to meet the needs of our city is to diversify the supply of homes to our city, and by giving councils, giving housing associations, supporting developers, supporting small developers in particular, you'll be able to encourage the development of more homes across our city. But the diversity of the supply of homes will mean you might have a situation where those who've got permission are banking on that because the price goes up of the property of the land with permission being granted, but there'll be an encouragement and incentive to get those homes started. It's basic housing economics. And the way the housing supply works in London at the moment is there's a disincentive to put a house on the market, because if you wait, once permission has been granted, you can sell it for a higher price because demand exceeds supply. What we're trying to do by diversifying the housing market with more council homes, more housing association homes, as well as market value homes and the luxury homes and so forth, is that will hopefully have an impact on reducing also the cost of market value homes at the same time.
And why are you land banking still across the GLA family? One example is it's nearly a year since the Met Police property strategy has been sitting in MOPAC. When is the strategy going to come out, and when are you going to start building some homes on all that surplus land?
Well, I'm astonished that the member has missed the reason why some of the estates were paused in relation to selling them off, which is because of the investment from City Hall. We managed to fund an additional 1,300 offices, and because of our lobbying, which was opposed by the bellow from Devonish, we managed to get additional offices from the government. We've now got 2,600 offices additionally from the government. We're lobbying for an additional 3,400 in the final year. If we get more police officers, we don't want them working from porter cabins. We want them working from good quality, high-spec offices when they've got to download their stuff. And so we need to pause, because, for example, if we took on more officers and there's no way for them to have lockers, no way for them to get changed, no way for them to pass out, no way for them to do their work, and so have their parades, I beg your pardon, then that would cause big problems. We are, for example, speaking to councils. I visited Hounslow, who are sharing some of their offices with the police there. So there is a good example of sharing office space, but I would suspect he'd be the first person to criticise if we sold off a piece of police estate and then had to buy back or rent because we increased police and staff numbers.
I'm looking forward to the Mayor being in a better mood next year. Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Polanski, and it concerns universal basic income.
Thank you for your question.
Oh, can I, before I start, could members, when contributing, be a bit closer to their mics as well, because there are some problems and it prevents feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. During the pandemic, we've seen that innovative approaches to protecting people's incomes can have a positive effect when there is a commitment from the government to take pioneering action. We've also seen that decisive action through the existing welfare benefit system, such as the £20 uplift to universal credit, has been effective in protecting living standards. I've always said that as we emerge from the pandemic, we should remain open-minded to a range of options for supporting Londoners in financial hardship. To this end, I commissioned research to better understand what effect different policy choices could have on levels of poverty in London and different groups' levels of household income. That research showed that retaining the £20 a week uplift to universal credit and removing the benefit cap would take 70,000 children in London out of poverty immediately. It also considered the effect that one form of universal basic income might have if implemented in London. That showed a potential positive impact on poverty levels, but at a substantial cost to the taxpayer. It's important to also consider the risks that would be inherent in moving all existing claimants onto a new system, particularly those in the most vulnerable circumstances. We saw the huge disruption caused by the introduction of universal credit. Further work is needed to fully understand how new systems might compare to existing systems in providing support to the households that most need it, and we should be cautious about pushing for the abolition of a welfare system that has shown that it can, when properly funded, be effective. I'm aware of a number of UBI pilots already underway across the UK and Europe, and I'll consider their findings. I will also share the findings of the research I've commissioned with ministers for their consideration. But the government can easily act now within existing structures to drive down poverty and protect living standards. I'm very concerned that many Londoners are facing the perfect storm of support being removed while the cost of living rises, especially as we enter the coldest months of the year. The government should remove the benefit cap and reinstate the £20 a week increased universal credit. The increase must also apply to Londoners who receive legacy benefits, who have never had their benefits uplifted, many of whom are single parents or disabled.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And can I associate with all your comments about what the government can and must do around protecting people, particularly those living in poverty. Now, your own research showed for a universal basic income, we could lift over 100,000 Londoners out of poverty. So surely this is something that we really want to investigate and make happen. Now, I had a meeting recently with Guy Standing, who I'm sure you know is an economist who's one of the leading experts in a basic income. And he talked about, well, I talked to him about a plan I had for 2 tower blocks in London in 2 different boroughs, where we could give every single member of that community a basic income for 18 months and measure the impacts, not just financially, but also for their physical well-being, their mental well-being. And this can actually cut across a lot of things. You can save money in policing, in education, in tackling the climate emergency. So isn't the question more, how can we afford not to do this? And would you consider having such a pilot in London?
Well, the problems with any pilots in London is we need the monies to do so. And that's one of the reasons why we're sharing our research with the government. I'm more than happy for London to be used as a pilot in relation to the exploration of UBI. You'll be aware of the work done in Wales, I'm sure, in relation to the schemes they had in place. And also you'll be aware of some of the good work around universal basic services. And so I'm all for innovation. One of the things you'll know, we'll need support from HMG to do any of this stuff. And so I'm more than happy to get my officers to speak with you about the work we're doing. I'm hoping the research unlocks some of these conversations in government because, you know, I think we should be open-minded. You'll be aware of the work in Finland as well. So more than happy to speak to you about what we can do. But I think the obstacle is going to be without support from HMG.
No, I really appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. And Guy, who I was speaking about, has been advising Mark Drayford for that Welsh pilot with the Labour government there. Now, in 2017, the DWP actually suspended their current system to allow a universal basic income pilot in a city in the UK. So we know that this can happen. Are you doing any work to kind of engage with them or lobby for them to make a shift so you can do a UBI in London?
I mean, to be fair, this work began in 2010 when Ian Duncan Smith was first made the Secretary of State. So it's 7 years to get to 2017. So I'm not saying, you know, that we never, just because there's challenges and obstacles. What I'm saying is we'll be cognizant of the consequences of going to a simple system. The point I was making in my answer was we've shown that actually the targeted support, universal credit being a good example now, £20 uplift, a good example now, can lead to really good results that are cheaper than UBI. I'm not saying UBI no. What I'm saying is actually there's things we can do now, and you've agreed with that, which is really, which, you know, I appreciate. We can do work on this. We're happy to. What I don't want to do, though, is with limited bandwidth, officers spend lots of time doing work that will be rejected by the government. That's my big concern. I've got to be pragmatic.
Understood. And with 10 seconds left, could I just ask you, I really appreciate a meeting with your team on this.
Absolutely.
Could I bring Guy Standing to that meeting so we could have an expert in the room?
Yeah, and this is a good example, by the way, often ideas from the Green Party being well received by us, and this is a good example of cross-party working that we should be doing in the interest of our city.
On that note, Merry Christmas and have a Happy New Year.
You too, Zach.
Thank you. Will the Assembly agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 1.1h in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
The next question, and final question, I believe, is in the name of Assembly Member McCartney, and it concerns domestic violence prosecution time.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question, and thank you for your campaign on this issue for as long as I've been Mayor, and before then, I know. I do. We know that domestic abuse is complicated, and many people do not immediately recognise they are in or have been in an abusive relationship. We also know that in many cases, reporting the offence may not be the first thing a victim is considering when their immediate safety is at risk. The early release of the Women's Aid Domestic Abuse Report 2022 finds that on average, abuse lasts 6 years before a victim finds the strength to leave an abusive situation. Safe Lives reports that on average, victims experience 50 incidents of abuse before getting help and before getting effective help. All this underlines why the 6-month time limit for prosecution is not appropriate and should be lifted. While the 2021 Domestic Abuse Act made some welcome changes that will help tackle violence against women and girls, there is still a long way to go. There are no specific offences for domestic abuse, and many domestic abuse incidents are classified as summary offences, meaning they fall within the 6-month time limit for reporting. That's why I fully support the amendments initially proposed by Yvette Cooper, Member of Parliament, and then by Baroness Newlove to the Policing and Crime Bill that would extend the time limit for summary offences where there is an indication of domestic abuse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's good to hear. Can I just ask you, do you know how many cases are estimated to have been dropped in London alone because of this?
The figure I have is, so for those offences described as common assault, that's a statutory offence, this is just reported in between 1st of April 2016 and 31st of March 2021, the Met Police think there were more than 850 crimes that are described as common assault, where there was a marker for domestic abuse and the prosecution time limit of 6 months had expired.
And of course, that is only those that were reported to the police. There will be a hidden iceberg under that. Can I ask, what has your office done to lobby around this?
So, as I mentioned, we fully support the campaign in Parliament to, as the Domestic Abuse Act now didn't address this for the bill going through Parliament, the Police and Crime Bill, to have as an amendment this on there. We lobbied for these changes, and I should, just for those who don't know, Baroness Newham is someone who's got huge experience in this area. She was the Victims Commissioner, and the fact that she's moving the amendment gives us hope. These are also supported, by the way, by the Independent Victims Commissioner for London, Claire Waxman, as well.
Okay. Thank you. Now, Mr. Mayor, obviously we saw during lockdowns in particular rates of domestic abuse and violence rising. Now, with the current situation with regards to COVID, people not able to socialise as they can do or could have done, what more can you do to ensure that domestic violence survivors get the support they need?
Well, it's worth reminding ourselves, I know you know this, but during lockdown, but also working from home, we saw a massive increase in domestic abuse, in domestic violence, and we realised that the survivor groups and victims groups were struggling. The waiting lists were huge. And so we invested initially in year to give these groups support, including for more accommodation. My worry is, Christmas as it is, domestic abuse, domestic violence goes up. That combined with working from home, that combined with people not going out and being at home, the linkage with alcohol at Christmas time, you'll see a further increase on domestic abuse and domestic violence. The Mayor's Office of Police and Crime are speaking to survivor groups and specialists to see what additional help we can provide within our limited resources. I think it's really important, though, that we encourage everyone to come forward with this if they're the victims of domestic abuse, domestic violence. Don't suffer in silence. Police are better trained now than they ever have been. We've got more women officers. We work closely with survivor groups and specialist groups, including those who work with Londoners for whom English isn't the first language, and those who haven't got recourse to public funds. There is a way out, so please report it.
Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. And good afternoon now, Mr. Mayor. And I don't know if this is the final Mayor's question to the Mayor of 2021, but since we have some time left, Mr. Mayor, I want to flag up 3 issues and then come to my question. Firstly, the anti-racist cricket initiative that I asked you about or mentioned the last Mayor's question time is on course to be launched sometime in January, and your office is aware of what we are doing. Secondly, I think what you said about domestic violence, report. We must get, I know the reasons why people don't report, but can I just flag up a project that I'm now involved with former Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chowdhury, who grew up in Newham, studied in Newham, and spent most of a 30-year policing career in Newham. We are trying to develop some long-term strategies, working with the Deputy Mayor, your Deputy Mayor, leaders like Darren Rodwell, Jazz Atwell, to form some long-term strategies, not just around domestic violence, but all types of crime, drawing on the practical experiences that people like her have, which I think sometimes is lost to the Met, a point that I made to the Commissioner. And also yesterday, I asked the Deputy Mayor at Police and Crime Committee about where we are with the national and international capital city grants. London is underfunded by £100 million. And to quote her from memory, her exact words were, she didn't hold out much hope in terms of getting the monies that you require from the government. But it's important we do get these extra resources because the Met does have national and international responsibilities. And even the Home Office, the own expert, says that we are underfunded. But Mr. Mayor, This is my question to you, because obviously we're living in difficult times, the new variant and so on. You got re-elected with a comfortable majority in May. And what Londoners and in the country look out for in politicians is vision, hope, a sense of journey. Where are we going? What is our travel destination? And with that in mind, can I just ask you this simple question? So, sort of to end the year on a positive note, what are your wishes for London and Londoners for 2022?
Well, thank you for your comments and your question. I think the way I'd answer that question is, look, our city, not just in previous decades, but in previous centuries, has come through some really tragic things: plagues, fires, blitzes, terrorist attacks, and this pandemic is obviously a catastrophe for not just our city, our country, but the world. I'm so confident we're going to come through this. Why? Because I see on a daily basis the steps Londoners are going to come together, from volunteering to give out the booster jab and the vaccine, to those who are key workers working their socks off this Christmas. You will know, because you thank them often, our blue light services will be working this Christmas when many of us will have times off. Joanne referred to the work of domestic abuse groups, domestic victim survivor groups. Many of them will be working above and beyond during this Christmas period, and that's what gives us a source of optimism, Londoners. At the heart of this is our ability to bounce back. We bounce back, greener, more sustainable, better than we were before. And I'm so hopeful of our city, and the evidence I've seen over the last 7 months since I was re-elected is we've got a city fizzing with ideas, buzzing, and I'm looking forward to 2022 being a better year in terms of health for our city, but also wealth and prosperity, and also reducing the inequalities that still exist in the greatest city in the world. That can't be right, and I think all of us should work together to reduce those inequalities.
Mr. Mayor, with London continuing to move east from City and East London, can I wish you all the best for 2022? And since you wished us a Merry Christmas, can I give you the same greetings to you, your family, your staff, and through you, the whole GLA family. Thank you.
Thanks, much appreciated.
There being no other questions or interventions required, Mr. Mayor, you're now free to go.
Thank you.
Can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion which is set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Agreed. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recent action taken by me as Chair in deciding to hold a confirmation hearing for the proposed appointment of Moira Sinclair, OBE, as Chair of the Mayor's Cultural Leadership Board, where the candidate was asked to provide a CV and supporting statement? Can I ask the Assembly to agree an extension to the appointments of Suzanne McCarthy and Alan Simcock as independent persons under Section 28(7) of the Localism Act 2011 to the 31st of December 2022, noting that this matter is a joint decision with the Mayor? Can I also ask the Assembly to agree in relation to urgent matters only, a general delegation of authority in respect of the Assembly's powers and functions, apart from those that cannot be delegated under the GLA Act 1999, be granted to the Chair of the GLA Oversight Committee in consultation with the Deputy Chairman, party group lead members, relevant committee chairs and myself from the close of this meeting until the next meeting of the London Assembly on the 20th of January 2022. Good, that was long, wasn't it? Sorry about that. And as just mentioned, the next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be at the Mayor's Question Time meeting, which takes place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 20th January, in the Chamber City Hall, Kamal Chunchi Way. I'm now going to consider, I have agreed to one item of urgent business concerning the election of a chair of the Police and Crime Committee on the grounds that the vacancy concerned arose after the publication of the agenda for the meeting, and in order that the matter be determined in advance of the next scheduled meeting of that committee on the 6th of January. I will now take nominations for the office of Chair of the Police and Crime Committee for the remainder of 2021-22 Assembly year. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you, Chair. We worked out a chairing arrangement at the beginning of the term which allocated the chairs in a fair and proportionate way. This was Labour's year to chair PCC, so we think it's appropriate that Labour take their place. So I would like to nominate Assemblymember Unmesh Desai if Assemblymember Unmesh Desai is prepared to do it.
Assemblymember Desai, do you accept the nomination?
Is that seconded, Chair?
Do we have a seconder for that? Sorry.
Yeah.
Assemblymember Russell, you're seconding?
If Assemblymember Desai would like to take up the role of chair, then I would be very happy to second him.
Assemblymember Desai, do you accept the nomination?
Chair, I'm honoured that Assemblymember Hall and Assemblymember Russell thought it fit to propose me for the position of chair of the committee, a position I've held previously. It's an extremely important position. It's with much regret, that I have to decline their nomination. Whoever is going to take over as chair of the committee, I wish them well.
Okay.
Chair, can I also point out that Assemblymember Pigeon would also wanted Assemblymember Desai. Just, it won't make any difference, but I wanted, she's not here to speak for herself. So.
With that nomination falling, are there any other nominations to chair the Police and Crime Committee? Assemblymember Russell.
I would invite the Labour group to nominate someone, but if they don't wish to nominate anyone, in the interests of stability, I would suggest that the current deputy chair continues as chair, and in that case, I would like to nominate Assemblymember Susan Hall.
Is there a seconder to that nomination?
Chair, can we hear from Labour if they would like to nominate someone before that?
Assemblymember Cooper, you wish to speak?
Sure, I'm very happy to answer that question just for clarity, and the answer is no.
Are there any second? Assemblymember Fortune.
I'm happy to second the current deputy to take over the chair.
What do we do if there's anyone?
Thank you, members. Can I confirm that's the only nomination on the table? If so, Chair, then you are able to declare Assemblymember Hall Chair of the Police and Crime Committee for the remainder of the 21-22 Assembly year, Chair.
I think that's, we can now declare that Assemblymember Hall is now the Chair of the Police and Crime Committee. Do we have to take a position about the question?
That now leaves a vacancy for Deputy Chair. Would Assembly members wish to deal with that now, or would you perhaps wish to delegate it to the first meeting of the PCC in the new year?
What's the review of the room? Assemblymember Hall?
Can I nominate Assemblymember Russell as Deputy Chair?
Okay. Assemblymember, is that seconded? Assemblymember Fortune is seconded. Assemblymember Cooper?
I was just going to suggest that it was delegated to the next meeting to make that decision, but I also just wondered if we could clarify if Assemblymember Bailey, who personally I felt did do the right thing by resigning as the chair, has actually resigned from the committee altogether, and do we need to, can both those matters be dealt with at the same time at the next meeting? It would be good to have clarification on that point. Thank you.
We've not received any notification of resignations from the committee. So we have an outstanding nomination of Assemblymember Russell as Vice Chair. Is that correct? So are there any other nominations? In which case, Assemblymember Russell will operate as Vice Chair. Thank you. I think, sorry, is there some uncertainty? No? Assemblymember Berry, sorry,
Chair, does
I left something out.
Assemblymember Russell not need to be asked if she accepts the nomination?
Oh, I do apologise. I'm sorry. That's why I looked like I was floundering. Assemblymember Russell, do you accept the nomination?
I'm very happy for this matter to be considered at the next meeting, but I'll accept the nomination for. I'll accept it for now. Just.
Well, accepting it for now is accepting it. It either is accepted or it's not. If you don't accept it, then we can put it on.
I'll accept it.
Okay. In which case, Assembly Member Russell will serve as Vice Chair of the Police and Crime Committee for the remainder of 2021 Assembly year. That being said, there's no other business. I'd just like to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, and particularly, may I say, to those people who are absent today and as a result of this pandemic. And I think when we're spending our time at Christmas enjoying the company of our families, I think we should just remember that there are a lot of people in London over the next few months who will not have a great Christmas, and they need our support. That being said, Merry Christmas, and God bless us, everyone.